A 9-year-old girl walked out of a diner bathroom with a Band-Aid on her nose and a lie already memorized on her lips. Nobody in that diner moved, nobody said a word. Because in Cedar Ridge, men like Travis Harper didn't look like monsters. They looked like neighbors. They looked like fathers. They smiled with the right amount of warmth and crushed everything behind closed doors where no one could file a report. But that night, through sleet, through engine smoke, through the kind of cold that gets inside your chest and stays there, 3 motorcycles rolled into the parking lot of Benny's diner, and one man looked at that little girl's face and saw exactly what everyone else had chosen not to see. So, before we go any further, if this story hits you the way it hit me, hit that like button, drop your city in the comments right now. People are watching this from all over the country tonight, and I want to know where you're listening from. Now let's go. Stay with me all the way to the end, because this one doesn't let go. The snow came in sideways that Thursday night, the kind that didn't fall so much as a tack, driven horizontal by a wind that had been building since noon across the open flatlands west of Cedar Ridge. By 7 o'clock, the highway outside of town was a pale, featureless nothing. No lane markers, no shoulder, just white pressing against black pressing against white again, and the occasional pair of headlights floating through it like dying stars trying to find their way home. Benny's diner sat at the edge of town the way a last chance usually does. Half-lit, slightly crooked, the neon open sign in the window buzzing with a short that had never been fixed, because Benny himself had been dead for 11 years, and nobody who came after him bothered to learn the difference between a live wire and a dead one. The sign read, OPE most nights. Tonight it flickered between OPE and total darkness every 4 seconds, like it couldn't make up its mind whether it wanted to welcome anyone at all. Inside, the place smelled like burnt coffee, old grease, and the particular exhaustion of people who had nowhere better to be. 6 booths ran along the window side. A counter with 8 stools faced the kitchen pass-through. A Christmas wreath somebody had hung on the wall in December was still there, mid-January. Its red ribbon faded to the color of old rust. Grace Harper sat in the second booth from the back with her hands wrapped around a mug she wasn't drinking from. She was 31 years old and looked 10 years older than that, not because she'd lived hard in the way some people mean when they say it, not reckless, not wild, but because she'd spent 2 years carrying something that had no name that polite people used in public. Her hair was dark, pulled back tight against her neck in a way that left no loose ends for anyone to grab. Her sleeves were down to her wrists despite the warmth inside the diner. Her eyes moved every time the door opened, not the way curious people's eyes move, the way trained people's eyes move. Measuring, calculating exits, noting who was bigger than her and who was between her and the door. Her daughter was in the bathroom. Emma was 9. She'd been in there 11 minutes. Grace knew because she counted. The waitress, a heavy-set woman named Dot, whose name tag was missing the D so it just read OT, came around with the coffee pot and didn't ask before refilling Grace's mug. That was either kindness or habit. Grace didn't look up to determine which. "Your little one doing okay?" Dot asked. "She's fine," Grace said. "Just washing up." It came out smooth, practiced. The way answers come out when you've been answering the same question in different rooms for 2 years without ever actually answering it. Dot lingered half a second longer than necessary, the way women sometimes do when they're not sure if they should push, then moved on down the counter. Grace exhaled slowly and stared at the mug and counted to herself again, because counting was the only thing she had left that felt like control. 12 minutes now. The bathroom door at the back of the diner opened and Emma came out. She was small for her age, with her mother's dark hair and something in her eyes that 9-year-olds weren't supposed to have yet, a kind of watchfulness, a learned stillness that sat wrong on a child's face the way a 3-piece suit would. She walked with her shoulders slightly inward, her chin down, moving through the diner the way people move through spaces where they've learned not to take up too much room. There was a Band-Aid across the bridge of her nose. It was slightly crooked, applied by small fingers in a dim bathroom mirror. Underneath it, if you looked at the edges where the adhesive met skin, the bruising spread in yellowed, greenish arcs that spoke a completely different language than the one Grace had been rehearsing. Emma slid into the booth across from her mother and picked up a crayon from the small pile Dot had left on the table. She didn't say anything. She just started drawing on the paper placemat, slow, deliberate strokes, pressing harder than children usually press. Grace watched her daughter draw and said nothing. Outside, the storm pushed against the windows. The bell above the door went off at 7:22, not the polite ding of a customer stepping in out of the rain. The sound the bell made when the door was thrown open hard, pushed by something heavier and less apologetic than weather. The cold came in first, a full-body blast that made Dot grab her coffee pot tighter and made the two old men at the counter turn their heads. Then the sound followed, a low, settling rumble from outside that took a moment to identify as three motorcycle engines cutting off in near-perfect unison in the parking lot. The door stayed open 3 seconds longer than it needed to. Then Stone walked in. He was not a large man in the way that word usually means. He wasn't tall, didn't have the bodybuilder architecture that some men use as a substitute for authority. He was built the way old machinery is built, compact, dense, like everything unnecessary had been stripped away until only function remained. He was somewhere in his mid-40s with a face that had been broken at least once and healed without apology, a jaw that hadn't seen a razor in 4 days, and eyes the color of flint in dim light, gray with something harder underneath. His leather cut was black, worn soft in the places that mattered, and bore the patch of the iron-bound Brotherhood on the back, a chain-wrapped fist above the name of a club that had been riding these roads since before Cedar Ridge had a stoplight. He walked to the counter and sat down without looking at anyone. Behind him came Deke, thinner, younger, with a beard that was more suggestion than commitment, and restless hands that never fully stopped moving. He scanned the room the way soldiers scan rooms, the habit so deep it had become invisible to him. He sat 2 stools down from Stone and ordered black coffee before Dot had fully turned around. The third man, Rowdy, took the stool at the far end of the counter. He was the oldest of the three, somewhere in his early 50s, with gray braided into his beard and a stillness that was different from Stone's stillness. Where Stone was compressed, Rowdy was simply patient, the way very old trees are patient. He took off his gloves slowly, finger by finger, and laid them on the counter and looked at nothing in particular. The diner didn't go silent exactly. It adjusted. Voices dropped half a register. The 2 old men at the counter paid attention to their food. Dot moved with slightly more efficiency than she had a moment ago. It wasn't fear, not precisely. It was the recalibration that happens when something enters a space and everyone present instinctively understands the room has different rules now. Stone ordered pot roast and coffee without looking at the menu. And then, because he was Stone, he looked at the room. Not aggressively, not conspicuously. The way a man looks at a room when looking at rooms has become as automatic as breathing. The slow visual inventory of a person who has learned the expensive way that the room you stop paying attention to is the room that kills you. His eyes moved across the old men, across Dot, across the window where snow pressed flat against the glass, across the booths. They landed on Emma. Not on Grace. On Emma. On the Band-Aid. On the angle of it. On the way her small shoulders were pulled inward. On the drawing she was making. Not horses, not the stars and hearts of 9-year-olds. Dark shapes, geometric, pressed hard into the paper with a crayon that was already worn to a stub. Stone looked at that drawing for exactly 3 seconds. Then he looked at Grace. Grace was already looking back at him. It lasted less than a moment. She pulled her eyes away first, dropping them to her mug, and Stone turned back to his coffee without expression. But something had been exchanged in that quarter second that didn't require words. An acknowledgement, a question, a refusal to pretend that both of them hadn't just seen what they'd seen. Deke leaned 6 inches to his left and said very quietly, not looking at Stone, 2 o'clock, booth. I see it, Stone said. The kid. I see it, Stone said again. Silence settled back between them like snow settles on flat ground. Shot. Emma had been pressing the crayon so hard the tip broke. She looked at the broken stub in her fingers with the expression of a child who has learned not to react to small losses, because reacting to small losses costs energy you might need later. She set it aside carefully and picked up a blue one and kept going. Grace reached across and put her hand over Emma's without speaking. Emma didn't look up, but she turned her hand over under her mother's and held on. How's your nose? Grace asked, her voice so low it barely registered as sound. Fine, Emma said. Same voice, same practiced smoothness, same single syllable dropping into the space between them and closing off any further entry. Grace had taught her daughter this language without meaning to. The language of fine, the language of okay, the language of nothing to see here, learned so thoroughly by 9 years old that Emma used it the way she used breathing, without awareness, without effort. Grace pressed her lips together and looked at the window. We'll get a room tonight, she said. The day's in off the interstate. We'll figure out the rest in the morning. Emma nodded without looking up. I need you to stay close to me when we leave, Grace said. Don't run ahead. Emma nodded again. She knew what that meant. She'd known what that meant for 2 years. The bell above the door went off again at 7:40. Grace's hand tightened over Emma's before the door even finished opening. Travis Harper walked into Benny's diner with snow on the shoulders of his jacket and a smile that cost him nothing and explained everything. He was 43 years old, broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that read as trustworthy in short exposure. Square jaw, direct eyes, the controlled charisma of a man who had spent years understanding exactly how much warmth to project to get what he wanted from a room. He wore clean dark denim and a Carhartt jacket and looked, walking into a diner on a Thursday night, exactly like someone's decent husband. He looked at Grace across the room, and the smile deepened. There she is, he said. Not loud, just loud enough. Grace released Emma's hand. Travis walked to the booth and stood at the end of it, not sitting, one hand on the back of Grace's seat. Not touching her, just establishing geography, placing himself between her and the rest of the room. He looked down at Emma, and his expression moved through a specific performance that Grace had watched so many times she could have scored it like music. Concern first, then warmth, then the particular tenderness that looked like love from the outside and felt like a door closing from the inside. Hey, baby girl, he said to Emma. Let me look at that nose. Emma went still. Not the stillness of a child being examined. The stillness of a small animal that has learned that stillness is the best available defense. She tipped her face up toward her father and let him look. Her hands flat on the table, her eyes on a point somewhere past his left shoulder. Travis touched the Band-Aid gently. Too gently. The performance of gentleness. Looks okay, he said. You've got to be more careful on that bike, Em. I've told you. He said it to Emma, but the sentence was aimed at the room, at Dot, at the old men, at the general public of Benny's diner, who might have been forming questions they hadn't asked yet. It landed the way he intended, an explanation, a concerned father providing context. Nothing to see here, except that Emma's Band-Aid, in the shift of light when Travis tilted her face upward, had peeled slightly at one corner, and underneath it, spreading from the bridge of her nose toward her left eye in colors that a 9-year-old's face had no business wearing, was a bruise that no bike fall had ever made. At the counter, Stone set down his fork. He didn't stand up. He didn't move toward the booth. He sat at the counter with his coffee mug in his right hand and his left hand flat on the formica, and he watched Travis Harper perform the role of concerned father for the 11 people in Benny's diner. And something behind his flint-gray eyes went very, very still, in the way that things go still right before they stop being still. Deke had gone quiet beside him. Rowdy, at the far end of the counter, hadn't moved, but his patience had changed quality. It was no longer the patience of a man eating pie. It was the patience of a man who is waiting to find out what kind of night this is going to be. Travis ruffled Emma's hair, a gesture so practiced it looked sincere, and told Grace he'd driven up to check on them because the storm was getting bad and he was worried. He said it the way politicians say things. Complete sentences, eye contact, enough warmth that refusal sounds like ingratitude. I just want to make sure you two are safe, he said. Grace said nothing. Travis's smile held its shape, but something behind his eyes adjusted, the way temperature adjusts in a room when a heater cuts off. He reached out and touched Grace's jaw, the underside of her chin, the gesture moving between affection and inventory. His thumb pressed slightly. Grace absorbed it without flinching. She had a lot of practice, not flinching. I'll wait outside, Travis said pleasantly. You two finish eating and then we'll all head home together. No point in driving separate in this weather. He looked at Emma again. Right, baby girl? Emma was looking at her drawing. Travis waited a beat, the beat where compliance was supposed to arrive, and when it didn't, Something moved behind his eyes that Grace caught, and Emma caught, and that nobody at the counter should have been able to catch from 15 feet away. Stone caught it. Travis left the booth and walked back through the diner, nodding once at Dot as he passed the counter, and pushed out through the door into the dark and the snow. The bell made its hard sound again. The door closed. His headlights came on in the parking lot and stayed on, facing the diner windows. He wasn't leaving. He was parking. Grace looked at those headlights and put her hand flat on the table and stared at them and did the math that she had been doing for 2 years. The math of risk and consequence, and how much worse it gets when you run and get caught versus when you stay and survive it one more night. Behind her, at the counter, a voice said quietly, "Ma'am?" Grace turned. Stone was sitting with his coffee mug in both hands, looking at her directly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't introduce himself. He spoke with the compressed economy of someone who had no patience for the unnecessary and infinite patience for the necessary. "I'm not going to bother you," he said, "but I need to ask you something." Grace looked at him the way she'd learned to look at men, cataloging exits even while making eye contact, filing him into a category before he finished his first sentence. Biker, middle-aged, hard. The patch on his chest, the eyes that had seen things. "Who put that bruise on your daughter's face?" Stone said. The diner held its breath. Grace didn't answer, but she didn't look away. And Stone, who had spent years learning to read the rooms that people built around themselves out of silence and survival, understood that her not answering was itself an answer. He nodded once, not with satisfaction, with something older and heavier than that, and turned back to his coffee. "Okay," he said quietly, as if she'd told him everything. Because she had. Nuts. Emma had gone completely still in the booth. She was looking at Stone with the specific attention of a child who has learned to take the measure of adults very quickly, because taking the measure of adults is how you know what's about to happen before it happens. She studied him the way she studied everything, without appearing to study, with the surface appearance of doing something else entirely. He had ordered pot roast. He had large hands, not smooth. His jacket was worn at the left elbow in a way that meant he'd been resting it on things for years. He was eating with his fork in his left hand, which people did when their right hand needed to stay free for other things. He hadn't looked at his phone once. Emma looked at the drawing she'd been making. She'd been drawing a horse. She hadn't realized it until now. She'd started with dark shapes, geometric and closed, and somewhere in the last 20 minutes her hand had shifted without her noticing, and the shapes had opened up and lengthened and become the outline of something running, 4 legs extended, neck stretched forward, mane caught mid-motion. She stared at it. She didn't know what to do with that. Grace was still looking at the headlights in the parking lot. "Mom," Emma said. "I know," Grace said. "We can't—" "I know," Grace said again, softer. Emma folded the drawing in half and then in half again and tucked it into the pocket of her coat. She looked at Stone one more time. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at Rowdy, something passing between them without language. The communication of men who had spent enough time in the same kind of situations to have developed a shorthand for them. Rowdy slid off his stool and walked to the back of the diner, past the bathrooms, toward what Emma assumed was a kitchen. She watched him go. She didn't know why. She filed it away. "Grace," Dot said, appearing at the booth with the coffee pot and speaking too quietly for anyone more than 2 feet away to hear. She set the pot down and kept her hand on it. "That man was here an hour ago." She didn't say which man. She didn't need to. "He came in, asked if you'd been here. I said no. He went around back and checked the lot. Then he left." Grace closed her eyes. "He came back," Dot said. "I know," Grace said. "He's going to wait you out." "I know that too." Dot looked at her for a long moment. The look of a woman who has seen certain things happen in certain kitchens and certain parking lots and learned the hard way that there is a difference between knowing the right thing to do and being willing to do it when it costs you something. She refilled Grace's mug and said nothing else and moved back down the counter. The headlights in the parking lot hadn't moved. Grace did the math again. Motel. Travis would follow. Her sister's in Duluth. He knew the address. The police, she'd tried that. February 2 years ago, she'd stood in a sheriff's station with Emma on her hip and a split lip she hadn't been able to explain well enough, and come home with a pamphlet about domestic resources and Travis's hand on her back as they walked to the car. She'd tried that. She looked at her coffee. She looked at the headlights. She looked, without meaning to, at Stone. He was finishing his pot roast. He set down his fork and pulled out his phone and typed something and put it back and drank his coffee and looked, for all the world, like a man who was exactly where he intended to be. Under the counter, she could see his left hand, relaxed, unhurried. She had spent 2 years watching men's hands. That was the first pair she'd seen in 2 years that wasn't performing relaxation. It just was. She didn't know what to do with that, either. Rowdy came back from the kitchen. He sat back down on his stool and said to Stone, in a voice calibrated to carry exactly 2 seats, "Loading docks clear. Side road connects to Route 9 behind the grain elevators. Somebody left a van unlocked out back." Stone looked at his coffee. "Dot know?" he said. "Dot didn't say anything when I walked back there," Rowdy said. Stone nodded. Deke was looking at the parking lot through the window, at the headlights still burning, unmoving, patient in the way that men who have been controlling people for years are patient. "He's not going anywhere," Deke said quietly. "No," Stone said. "You know who he is?" Stone was already typing on his phone again. He turned it slightly so Deke could see the screen. A license plate number, 4 words under it. Check the county records. Deke didn't reach for his phone immediately. He looked at the booth where Grace was sitting with her hands wrapped around her mug, and Emma was sitting with her coat on and her folded drawing in her pocket. "How bad?" he said. Stone looked at Emma's face, at the bruise spreading from under the Band-Aid, at the way she sat, at the weight she carried in her shoulders that no 9-year-old's shoulders should know how to carry. "Bad enough," Stone said. That was all that needed to be said. Deke reached for his phone. Outside, Travis Harper's headlights burned white and patient in the dark. And in the second booth from the back of Benny's diner, Emma Harper pressed her hand flat on the table and counted the seconds without knowing she was counting them. The way her mother counted them. The way she'd always counted them. Waiting, as she always waited, for the world to decide what kind of night this was going to be. She looked at Stone one more time. He was already looking back, not with pity, not with the careful neutrality of someone performing non-involvement. He looked at her the way people look at things they've decided about, with a steadiness that had no performance in it, no calculation, nothing that needed anything from her in return. Emma had seen a lot of adult faces in 9 years. She had never seen one that looked like that. She didn't look away. And for the first time in longer than she could have told you, Emma Harper felt something shift somewhere very deep in her chest. Not hope, not quite, not yet, but the very faint, very dangerous precursor to hope, the thing that comes before you let yourself believe, the crack in the wall before the light gets in. She didn't know what was about to happen. She didn't know that Deke's phone was already pulling up 2 years of dropped charges and sealed reports, and a deputy's name that connected to Travis Harper's name in ways that were going to matter in the next 45 minutes. She didn't know that Rowdy had already confirmed the loading dock, already mapped the route to Route 9, already identified the closest person in the county who could open a door at 11 o'clock on a Thursday night without asking questions first. She didn't know any of that. She just knew that Stone was still looking at her, and that his hands were still resting the same way. Calm. Unhurried. Like he'd already decided. Like he had no intention of going anywhere. Emma pulled her crayon out of the pile, the dark one with the broken tip, and turned the paper placemat over to the blank side. She started drawing a horse running, full stride, neck forward, not looking back. Outside, the snow came down harder, and Travis Harper's headlights stayed burning in the dark. And somewhere in the distance, under all of it, the low growl of Harley engines ticked and cooled in the frozen parking lot, waiting. Deke's phone came back in 4 minutes. 4 minutes was enough. He read what was on the screen without expression, the way men read things they already suspected but needed confirmed before they were willing to act on them. Then he set the phone face down on the counter and picked up his coffee mug and held it with both hands and didn't drink from it. Stone was watching him from 2 stools away. "Talk to me," Stone said. Deke kept his voice flat, stripped of everything except information. 2 prior domestics. Cedar Ridge County, 18 months apart. First one, Grace Harper, complainant. Withdrew the statement 4 days later. Second one, same. Withdrew inside 72 hours. He paused. There's a note in the second file. Responding officer logged that the complainant appeared, quote, reluctant to proceed due to concerns about housing and financial stability. Stone said nothing. There's more, Deke said. Go ahead. But the responding officer on both calls was the same guy, Deputy Carl Mason. Mason's been with Cedar Ridge Sheriff's Office 12 years. Deke turned his coffee mug a quarter turn on the counter. Travis Harper coached Mason's son in Little League for 3 seasons. The diner's refrigeration unit kicked on somewhere behind the kitchen wall. The sound filled the silence for a moment and then receded. Rowdy hadn't moved at the far end of the counter. He was looking at his plate with the expression of a man doing arithmetic. So when she called, Stone said, she called into the same station, same rotation, same guy. And he talked her down. Or Harper did. Hard to know which conversation happened first. Deke finally drank from his mug, set it down. But she called. She tried. Stone absorbed that. He looked at the window, at the snow coming sideways, at the headlights still burning in the parking lot, patient and white and unblinking. He thought about what it costs a woman to make that call, to pack whatever she can carry, to get the kid dressed in the dark, to walk into a building full of uniforms and lay the worst thing that ever happened to her on a counter and ask for help. He thought about what it does to a person when the building full of uniforms sends her home. He thought about trying once. He knew something about trying once. Find Mason, Stone said. Deke looked at him. Find him how? Phone, address, whatever you've got. I want to talk to him. Stone. Not like that, Stone said. I want to talk to him. Deke held the look for a moment, then reached for his phone again. Rowdy spoke from the end of the counter without looking up from his plate. Girl's watching us. Stone didn't turn around. I know. She's been watching us for the last 20 minutes. I know that too. Smart kid, Rowdy said, and there was something in the way he said it. Not approval exactly, something quieter and older than approval, something that sounded like recognition. So Grace had stopped pretending to drink her coffee. She was sitting with her hands in her lap now, below the table edge where no one could see them. They were shaking. Not visibly. She'd learned to shake invisibly the way she'd learned everything else, through repetition, through necessity, through the accumulated practice of surviving in a space where any visible weakness became leverage. But under the table, her fingers were pressing into her own palms hard enough to leave marks. She was running the math again. She'd been running it for 2 years, and it always came out the same way, which was the most exhausting thing about it. Not the fear, not the pain, but the arithmetic. The endless columns of risk that never balanced in her favor. Leave, he finds you. Stay, you survived tonight. Call the police, Carl Mason answers. Don't call. You don't have to watch Emma watch you fail again. The one variable she'd never been able to solve for was help from outside, because outside help required trusting someone. And trusting someone required believing that the cost of trusting wrong wasn't worse than anything she was already carrying. She looked at the back of Stone's jacket, the patch, the chain-wrapped fist, the name of a club she'd never heard of before tonight. She didn't know anything about him except his face and his hands and the 4 words he'd said to her and the way he'd looked at Emma. She didn't know if he was safe or just a different kind of dangerous. She didn't know his name. She didn't know what he wanted. She knew what men usually wanted. She looked at Emma. Emma was drawing with focused, careful strokes, her tongue pressed between her teeth the way it always was when she was concentrating. The horse was taking shape on the back of the placemat, legs extended, mid-run, rendered with a precision that 9-year-olds didn't usually have. Emma had always drawn like this, even before. Even when she was 5 and 6 and the world had been simpler, she'd drawn with this pressure, this intention, like she was trying to get something out of her hands and onto the page before it escaped. Grace watched her daughter draw and felt the familiar collapse inside her chest, the one that happened every time she let herself look at Emma directly, at what Emma had become, at what Emma was carrying, the guilt that had no floor. She should have left sooner. She'd known that for 1.5 years. But knowing and doing were separated by a distance that people who hadn't stood in it couldn't measure accurately from the outside. The distance wasn't fear. Not exactly. It was the accumulated weight of every time she'd almost left and then hadn't. Every failed attempt sitting on top of the next until the pile became its own kind of gravity, pulling her down into the story that leaving wasn't possible, that this was just what her life was, that Emma would be safer with an intact household than with a mother who ran and got caught and came home to something worse. She'd told herself that story so many times it had started to feel like truth. She looked at Emma's nose, at the Band-Aid that had peeled at the corner, at the bruise underneath it that was telling a different story than the one Grace had been rehearsing. The story Grace had been rehearsing said she fell off her bike. The bruise said she didn't. And the bruise was patient. The bruise wasn't going anywhere. The bruise was going to be there in the morning and in 3 days and in a week, fading through its ugly spectrum of colors, carrying its own evidence with a stubbornness that no amount of rehearsal could revise. Grace pressed her hands harder into her own palms. Outside, Travis's headlights burned. Stone's phone buzzed on the counter. He looked at the screen, read it, looked up. "Mason's off duty," Deke said. "Home address is 4 miles east." Deke got it off a county database. "I didn't get it off anything," Deke said carefully. "It appeared." Rowdy made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. Stone was already typing a message. He sent it and pocketed the phone and looked at his food. The plate of pot roast that was mostly finished, the half-empty coffee mug, the ordinary evidence of a man eating an ordinary dinner. He looked at it for a moment with the expression of someone reviewing a plan. Then he stood up. Not quickly. Not with drama. He stood the way he did everything, with the economy of a man who'd stopped wasting motion sometime in his 30s, and laid cash on the counter more than the meal cost, and picked up his coffee and walked toward the booth where Grace and Emma were sitting. Grace's posture changed before he was halfway there. He saw it. He slowed his pace deliberately, giving her time to adjust, the way you approach something that has learned to be afraid of approach. He stopped at the end of the booth and didn't sit, and held his coffee with both hands, and kept his voice low enough that it didn't carry past the two of them. "My name's Stone," he said. "I ride with the Ironbound Brotherhood out of Junction Falls. I'm not going to tell you what to do or ask you for anything." He paused. "But I'm asking if I can sit down for a minute." Grace looked at him. Emma had stopped drawing. "Why?" Grace said. "Because your husband ran your plates in the parking lot 40 minutes before he came inside," Stone said. "And because there are 2 prior reports on him in county records that got buried, and I think you know who buried them." Grace's face didn't move, but something behind her eyes shifted. The specific shift of someone hearing a secret they'd been carrying alone, suddenly said aloud by a stranger. The shift of "how do you know that?" "You can tell me to walk away," Stone said. "I'll walk away. I'll go back to the counter and finish my coffee and ride out when the storm breaks." He looked at Emma, then back at Grace. "But I won't pretend I didn't see what I saw." The refrigeration unit kicked off again. The diner settled into its hum. Grace looked at her daughter. Emma was looking at Stone with those serious, measuring eyes, the drawing forgotten in her hands. She wasn't afraid. She was reading him the way she read everything, with the careful, patient attention of a child who has learned that adults are only legible if you watch them long enough and closely enough. "Sit down," Emma said. Grace looked at her daughter. Stone looked at the girl. Emma looked back at him with complete composure and said it again, quieter. "You can sit down." Stone sat. He didn't start talking immediately. He sat across from them and held his coffee mug and let the silence settle the way silence needs to settle before certain conversations can happen inside it. Grace was watching his hands. He knew it. He kept them still. "Carl Mason," he said finally. "You called him." Grace didn't answer. "February 2 years ago," Stone said. "And then again in October." Grace's jaw tightened. "You're very thorough for someone who just sat down for dinner." "I'm not thorough," Stone said. "Deke is thorough. I just ask questions." "What kind of club runs criminal background checks on strangers in diners?" "The kind that's been riding these roads long enough to know what certain situations look like," Stone said. He said it without apology. "I'm not here to judge you. I'm not here to tell you what you should have done. I'm here because you're still in it, and he's sitting in that parking lot, and I don't think tonight ends well if it ends the way it's heading." Grace looked at the window. "He'll wait," she said. He always waits. He doesn't—" She stopped, recalibrated. started again with the practiced flatness she used for this topic. He doesn't do anything in public. He's careful about that. I know, Stone said. So there's nothing to... I know he's careful, Stone said. I've seen careful men before. A pause. Careful men do their damage where it doesn't show. The sentence landed in the space between them, and neither of them moved for a moment. Emma had gone very still. Stone looked at her gently, not with pity, with the specific care of someone choosing exactly how much weight to put on the next moment. You drew a horse, he said. Emma looked at the placemat in her hands. Can I see it? He said. Emma looked at her mother. Grace nodded, barely. Emma slid the placemat across the table. Stone looked at the drawing for a long moment. The horse in full stride, neck forward, legs extended, rendered with the careful pressure of someone who'd been drawing the same motion over and over, working something out. He looked at it the way someone looks at a thing that tells them more than the person showing it intended. That's a good horse, he said. It's running, Emma said. I can see that. Horses run faster when they're not looking back, Emma said. That's why their eyes are on the sides of their heads, so they can see what's behind them without turning around. Stone held the drawing another moment. He set it back on the table, facing Emma, and wrapped both hands around his mug. Smart, he said quietly, and it wasn't the word adults use when they mean cute. It was the word you use when you mean it. Emma pulled the drawing back and held it carefully. Grace was watching the exchange with an expression that Stone couldn't fully categorize, something between grief and a fragile, unwilling tenderness. The expression of a mother watching her child be treated like a person by someone who didn't have to. What do you want? Grace said. Direct. No performance. To get you out of here tonight, Stone said. Both of you. Somewhere he can't follow. And then what? And then that's your decision, Stone said. Not mine. Grace studied him. Just like that. Just like that. You don't know us. No, Stone said. You don't know what we've... I don't need to, he said. Not tonight. Grace looked at the window again, at Travis's headlights, at the snow, at the empty highway beyond the lot, where there was nothing but dark and cold, and the long, flat nothing of a January night in a town that had already decided not to help her. There's a woman, Stone said more quietly. Darlene Marsh. Retired ER nurse. She lives 12 miles north of here, and she's done this before. Not officially, not through any program. She just opens her door. He paused. I'm going to call her right now if you say yes. Grace turned back from the window. You've done this before, she said. It wasn't a question. Stone looked at her steadily. Once, he said, I didn't do it well enough. The weight of that hung between them. The specific gravity of a man admitting failure, not performing humility, just stating a fact about himself with the kind of plainness that costs something. Grace looked at him for a long time. She looked at Emma. Emma was looking at Stone with those horse-on-the-sides-of-the-head eyes, watching without turning, taking in everything peripheral while appearing to look at something else. Okay, Grace said. So quietly, it was almost just breath. Stone nodded once, pulled out his phone. Muck. Deke appeared at the end of the booth. He'd approached from the blind side, from the kitchen corridor rather than the counter, and Grace startled before she caught herself, her body's reflexes faster than her conscious control, a full year of practice betrayed in a quarter-second flinch. Deke saw it. He stepped back immediately, both hands visible, his face carefully neutral. Sorry, he said, and he meant it. Didn't mean to come up like that. Grace absorbed the apology, pressed her hands flat on the table. Mason's on the phone, Deke said to Stone. He's not happy. Put him on speaker, Stone said. In here? Stone looked at Grace. Grace looked back and gave a fractional nod. Deke set his phone on the table. The call was already connected. For a moment there was just the sound of breathing on the other end. The stiff, defensive breathing of a man who knew why he was being called and was already building his wall. Deputy Mason, Stone said. Who is this? Not a question. Flat. My name isn't something you need, Stone said. What you need is to know that I'm sitting in Benny's diner right now with Grace Harper and her daughter, and Travis Harper is in the parking lot, and I have both prior incident reports in front of me. A pause. Those reports are sealed, Mason said. They were, Stone said. Another pause. Longer. The sound of breathing changing quality. The wall going up faster now, the defensiveness shifting into something more complex and less comfortable. Mr. Harper is a... I know what Travis Harper is to you, Stone said. I'm not calling to discuss that. I'm calling to tell you what's going to happen tonight and to give you one opportunity to be on the right side of it. You don't... The woman across from me tried to report this twice, Stone said. To your station, to you. And the reports disappeared. I don't know if you buried them because Harper asked you to or because it was easier than dealing with it. I don't particularly care right now. His voice hadn't risen. It was the same flat, unhurried register it had been since he sat down. What I care about is that tonight, something is going to change, and when it does, there are going to be questions. And the question I'd prefer you to be able to answer truthfully is whether you helped or whether you didn't. Silence on the line. What do you want? Mason said finally. I want you to call this in as a welfare check at this address, Stone said. Not Harper's address. Darlene Marsh on County Road 7, 12 miles north. I want a record that someone from the department was aware of where this woman and her child were tonight. That's a favor, Stone said. I know. And you know what you owe. The line was quiet for a long time. Emma was watching the phone on the table, watching the silence coming out of it the way she watched everything, with that patient, unnerving attention. I'll make the call, Mason said. Thank you, Stone said. And Deputy, what? Get better at your job. He nodded at Deke. Deke ended the call and picked up his phone and stepped back. Grace was staring at the middle of the table. He'll call it in? She said. He'll call it in, Stone said. You trust him? No, Stone said simply, but he's afraid of paperwork, and I just made paperwork his problem. That's enough. Grace looked at Emma. Emma looked back at her with those composed, unreadable eyes, and then looked at Stone and then looked at the phone in Deke's hand, and then back at her drawing. The loading dock, Stone said, turning to Deke. Clear, Deke said. Rowdy's already out back. Travis? Still in the lot. Hasn't moved. Stone stood up. He looked at Grace. We go out through the kitchen. My bike is on the service road behind the grain elevator. He won't see us from the lot. He paused. It's cold. Do you have her coat? She's wearing it, Grace said. Good. He looked at Emma. You ever been on a motorcycle? Emma shook her head. It's loud, he said. And cold. You hold on to whoever's in front of you and you don't let go, no matter what. Can you do that? Emma looked at him for a moment. I've been doing harder things than that all day, she said. The sentence hit Stone somewhere he didn't have a name for. He held her gaze for a moment. This 9-year-old child with her fractured nose and her drawing of a running horse and her impossible composure. And something moved behind his eyes that he didn't let reach his face. Yeah, he said quietly. I imagine you have. He turned toward the kitchen. Grace stood up. Her legs were unsteady for a moment, the pure physical aftermath of making a decision after 2 years of not making one, and she gripped the edge of the table until it passed. Then she straightened. She took Emma's hand. Emma held on. They followed Stone toward the kitchen door. Dot was at the pass-through when they came through. She looked at Grace. She looked at Emma. She looked at Stone, who gave her a single nod that communicated everything that needed communicating between two people who understood certain situations without requiring explanation. Dot set down her coffee pot. Back door's unlocked, she said. Always has been. Then she turned back to the counter and picked up the coffee pot and walked away and did not watch them leave. The kitchen smelled of old grease and dish soap and the particular warmth of an industrial range that had been running since 5 in the morning. 2 line cooks looked up from their stations, a teenager with headphones around his neck and an older man with a burn scar on his forearm, and looked at the 3 people moving through their kitchen toward the back door and made the collective decision to see nothing, to know nothing, to keep their eyes on their work. The back door was heavy and cold and opened onto the service alley. The cold hit them like a wall. Emma didn't make a sound. Grace pressed her closer and Emma tucked herself against her mother's side and kept moving. Stone pushed ahead, scanning the alley left and right with the practiced efficiency of someone for whom threat assessment was as automatic as breathing. He held up one hand behind him. Stop. And Grace stopped, pulling Emma still beside her. Rowdy was waiting 20 yards down the alley, two motorcycles running, low idle, cold weather rumble, the exhaust visible in pale clouds against the freezing air. Stone turned back to Grace. The bike on the right is Rowdy's. You ride with him. Emma rides with me. Grace looked at Rowdy. Rowdy looked back at her from under his gray-streaked beard with the patience of a man who'd been asked to earn trust before and understood how the process worked. He's good, Stone said. He'll keep you steady. Grace looked at her daughter. Emma was already moving toward Stone's motorcycle. She approached it the way she approached everything that frightened her. Directly, without flourish, with the determined forward motion of someone who has decided that the only way through a hard thing is through it. She looked at the bike, looked up at Stone. He helped her onto the seat and showed her where to hold and told her to press her knees in and lean the way he leaned and not to fight the motion. Emma nodded. She tucked her drawing deeper into her coat pocket. She wrapped her arms around Stone's jacket and held on. Stone started the engine. The Harley came alive under them, a low physical sound that moved through Emma's chest the way thunder moves, felt before it's heard. And for a moment Emma tightened instinctively, every muscle contracting with the noise and the vibration and the cold and the darkness and the everything of it. Then she breathed, and she held on. Stone pulled forward slowly, Rowdy behind them, lights off, moving through the service alley toward the side road that connected to Route 9. The grain elevators rose on their left, massive dark shapes against the snow-gray sky, blocking the view from the front parking lot, blocking Travis's view. The motorcycles turned onto Route 9, and Stone brought the engine up, and the cold hit full force, and the darkness opened ahead of them like an answer to a question Grace had been afraid to ask for 2 years. She pressed her face against Rowdy's jacket and held her daughter's image in her mind. Emma on the bike ahead, arms wrapped around a stranger's leather jacket, not looking back, just like the horse. Running. Town. They were 4 miles north of Cedar Ridge when Deke's voice crackled through Stone's earpiece. He's moving! Stone's jaw tightened. He kept his speed steady. Travis, he said, barely moving his lips, pulled out of the lot 2 minutes after you cleared the alley. He's on Route 9, heading north. Stone processed that. 4 miles between them. Storm conditions. Travis in a truck? Not a motorcycle. Slower in this weather, yes, but 4 wheels to 2. How'd he know? Stone said. I don't... Deke paused. Mason. One word, the full weight of it. Stone had made one call and given Carl Mason one chance, one opportunity to be on the right side of something for the first time in however many years he'd been on the wrong side of it. And Mason, faced with that opportunity, had made his choice in under 15 minutes. He'd called Travis. Stone felt something cold move through him that had nothing to do with the temperature. Behind him, Emma held on tighter as the bike's speed increased slightly. She could feel the change in the engine, the subtle forward lean, the shift in intention. She didn't ask. She pressed her face against the back of Stone's jacket and breathed his leather jacket and exhaust and cold air and held on with everything she had. Ahead, through the snow, the lights of Darlene Marsh's farmhouse appeared at the top of a low rise, 2 warm yellow windows burning against the dark like something that wasn't trying to convince anyone it was safe. It just was. And behind them, somewhere on Route 9, a single pair of headlights was closing the distance with the patient, unrelenting certainty of a man who had never once believed that anything he wanted could be taken from him permanently. Stone pulled into Darlene's driveway. He killed the engine. In the sudden silence, no motor, just wind, just snow, just Emma's breathing against his back. He pulled out his phone and looked at Deke's message one more time. Mason called Harper. He stared at it. Then he typed back 4 words. How far behind us? The answer came in 11 seconds, maybe 10 minutes. Stone sat on the cold motorcycle in Darlene Marsh's driveway, with Emma Harper's arms around his chest and the farmhouse lights burning yellow in the dark ahead of them. And he understood with the complete ice-water clarity of a man who has run out of room for error that there was no more time for careful. There was no more time for quiet plans and side roads and hoping that the deputy would do the right thing. Whatever happened next was going to happen in the next 10 minutes. And unlike 2 years ago, unlike the last time he'd been in a situation that looked like this and felt like this and ended the way it ended, Stone was not going to be 10 minutes too late. Not this time. He got off the bike. "Emma," he said quietly. She let go of him and slid off the seat, her legs unsteady on the frozen ground for a moment, her breath coming in visible clouds. She looked up at him. "Go to the door," he said. "Knock twice. Tell her Stone sent you." Emma looked at the farmhouse. She looked at Stone. "What are you going to do?" she said. Stone looked at the dark road behind them, at the black nothing of Route 9 stretching south into the storm, at the place where headlights would appear in the next 10 minutes like an answer to a problem that should have been solved 2 years ago. "I'm going to make sure he doesn't get to the door," Stone said. Emma stood in the driveway in the freezing dark with snow in her hair and a fractured nose and a drawing of a running horse in her pocket. She looked at Stone for a long moment with those unblinking, impossible eyes. Then she turned and walked to the farmhouse door. And Stone turned back to the road. And somewhere south of them, getting closer every second, Travis Harper drove through the dark with the expression of a man who had never once in his life been told no and meant it. That was about to change. The second set of headlights appeared on the county road. At the same moment, Emma's knuckles touched Darlene Marsh's front door. Stone saw them first. Not on Route 9. That was Travis, still south, still closing. These lights came from the east, from the parallel farm road that ran along the property line behind the old grain silos, and they were moving without headlights, just the faint amber glow of parking lamps cutting low across frozen mud. The kind of approach that isn't accidental. The kind of approach that means someone knows where you're going before you get there. Stone stepped off the gravel and put himself between the road and the porch in one motion. "Rowdy," he said. Rowdy was already off his bike. He'd seen it too. Maybe 2 seconds after Stone, which meant he'd been watching a different angle, which meant they were both doing the same math. Someone had come from the east, someone who knew this address. Someone who wasn't Travis, but was connected to Travis in a way that turned a one-man problem into something with geometry. "How many?" Stone said. "One vehicle," Rowdy said. "Pickup. Could be 2 inside." Behind them, the farmhouse door opened. Darlene Marsh stood in the frame. 63 years old, silver-haired, built like a woman who had spent 30 years lifting patients and carrying things heavier than patients. She looked at Emma standing on her porch in the freezing dark. She looked past Emma at the 2 bikers in her driveway. She looked at the county road where parking lamps moved slowly through the dark. She didn't ask a single question. "Inside," she said to Emma. "Now." Emma went inside. Grace was off Rowdy's bike and moving toward the door before the word finished. She made it to the porch steps and stopped and turned back and looked at Stone, and the look contained everything she couldn't say in front of her daughter. The terror, the recognition, the weight of knowing that what she had feared most was happening exactly the way she'd always known it would. "He called someone," Grace said. "Go inside," Stone said. "He has people. He has—" "Grace, inside. Now." Grace looked at him for one more second. Then she turned and went through the door, and Darlene closed it behind her and the porch light went off. Darkness. Stone stood in the driveway with Rowdy beside him and the cold pressing in from every direction, and 2 threats converging from 2 different roads, and his phone buzzing in his pocket with what he already knew was Deke telling him what he already knew. He answered without looking at the screen. "Talk," he said. "The truck on the county road is registered to Wade Purcell," Deke said. "He's Travis's cousin. Cedar Ridge address. 2 DU is, 1 assault charge dropped in 2019. A pause. "He's also on the volunteer fire department with Mason." Stone processed that. Mason to Travis, Travis to Wade. Wade coming from the east while Travis came from the south. A net closing from 2 directions around a farmhouse on a dead-end road 12 miles from the nearest occupied building. "Where are you?" Stone said. 2 miles out. "I'm coming up Route 9 from the junction. Don't come to the house." "Stone, don't come to the house. Pull off at the grain silos and cut your lights and wait for my call." Deke was quiet for a moment. What are you doing? Stone looked at the county road. The parking lamps had stopped moving. The truck was sitting about 300 yards east, idling in the dark, waiting. Not approaching, not retreating, waiting for Travis. I'm going to go talk to the cousin, Stone said. He ended the call. Rowdy was standing very still beside him, his breath visible in the cold, his hands at his sides, his weight settled in a way that communicated absolute readiness without any visible tension. He looked at Stone and waited. Stay with the house, Stone said. You're going alone. I'm going to talk. Rowdy studied him in the dark for a long moment. You keep saying that. Because I keep meaning it. And if the cousin doesn't want to talk. Stone didn't answer that. He reached into his saddlebag and took out a flashlight, heavy, metal, the kind that serves more than one purpose, and started walking east across the frozen field toward the parking lamps. Behind him, Rowdy watched him go. Then Rowdy turned to face the house and the south road and the darkness that Travis Harper was somewhere inside of, and he settled his weight and crossed his arms and did what he'd been doing for 30 years in situations like this. He waited. Inside the farmhouse, Darlene Marsh was already moving, not with panic, with the practiced, systematic urgency of a woman who had done this before, who had opened this door in the middle of the night enough times to have developed a protocol that didn't require thinking. She pulled curtains. She checked the back door lock. She turned off the kitchen light that faced the road and turned on the hallway light that didn't. She moved through her own house the way combat medics move through triage. Priorities first, emotions later. Grace stood in the hallway holding Emma's hand and watching Darlene work and feeling the specific vertigo of being inside someone else's emergency plan, of being the emergency. Bathroom's at the end of the hall, Darlene said without turning around. There's a first aid kit under the sink. I need to look at that nose. Her nose is... I need to look at it, Darlene said. The voice of a woman who had spent 3 decades in emergency rooms and was not interested in the version of events that ended with, "It's fine." Emma looked up at her mother. "It's okay," Grace said. "I know," Emma said. They went down the hall. Darlene finished the curtains and came to the bathroom door and knelt in front of Emma with the efficiency of someone who had knelt in front of 1,000 patients and the gentleness of someone who understood that this particular patient was 9 years old and had earned the right to be treated carefully. She peeled the Band-Aid off. The bruise underneath had deepened in the hours since the diner, the yellowed edges spreading wider, the center a dense, ugly purple that radiated across the bridge of Emma's nose and under both eyes. Darlene looked at it without expression. She pressed 2 fingers along the bridge very gently, reading the bone underneath. Emma didn't flinch. That was the thing that made Darlene stop. Not the bruise. Not the fracture she could feel under her fingertips. A hairline break, displaced slightly. The kind that would heal but would need monitoring. Not any of that. The fact that this 9-year-old child did not flinch when a stranger touched her broken nose. Darlene looked at Emma's face, at the composed, patient expression of a child who had been touched in painful places enough times that the reflex had been trained out of her. And something moved behind Darlene's eyes that she kept very carefully out of her voice. "Honey," she said, "I'm going to press a little harder. You tell me if it hurts." "Okay," Emma said. Darlene pressed. "Does that hurt?" "Yes," Emma said, calm, informational. "How about here?" "Yes." "Here?" Emma paused. "That hurts more." Darlene nodded. She opened the first aid kit and took out a cold compress and cracked it and placed it gently against Emma's face. "Hold that there," she said. 10 minutes. Emma held it. Darlene stood and looked at Grace. "Lift your sleeves," she said. Grace's face went still. "I'm a nurse," Darlene said. "Retired, but a nurse. I need to see your arms." Grace looked at Emma. Emma was sitting on the edge of the bathtub holding the cold compress to her face, watching her mother with those serious, old young eyes. Grace rolled up her left sleeve. The bruises ran from her wrist to her elbow. Not one event, but many, layered on top of each other in various stages of healing, a calendar of violence written on skin. Some were old enough to be yellow-brown ghosts. Some were fresh enough to still be dark. They overlapped in patterns that told their own story. Grip marks, 4-finger shapes, the specific geography of a hand closing around an arm and squeezing. Darlene looked at them. She didn't react visibly. She had spent too many years in emergency rooms to give a visible reaction to anything. But she pulled a small digital camera from the drawer beside the sink, old, the kind with a physical flash, and held it up. "I need to photograph these," she said. "For the record." "What record?" Grace said. "The one that's going to exist after tonight," Darlene said. "The one that Carl Mason can't lose." Grace stared at her. "You know Mason," Grace said. "I know what he's done," Darlene said, "and I know what he hasn't done." "Which is worse?" Grace was quiet for a long moment. Then she held out her arm. Darlene took the photographs. Arms, neck. The place on Grace's collarbone, where a bruise in the shape of a thumb was yellowing at the edges. Grace held still for each one with the expression of someone being documented, the expression of evidence. Then Darlene turned the camera to Emma. "Baby," she said, "can I take a picture of your nose?" Emma lowered the cold compress. She looked at the camera. She looked at her mother. "Will it help?" Emma said. Darlene looked at this 9-year-old girl sitting on the edge of a bathtub in a stranger's house at 11 o'clock at night with a fractured nose and a question that no child should have to ask. "Yes," Darlene said, "it will help." Emma sat very still while Darlene took the photographs. She didn't flinch for those either. Stone reached the truck on the county road. He came at it from the field side, not the road, approaching at an angle that kept him out of the mirrors until he was close enough that the flashlight beam hitting the driver's window would be a surprise instead of a warning. He knocked on the glass with the metal barrel of the flashlight. 2 sharp raps. The window came down. Wade Purcell was 38, thicker than Travis, with the same jaw structure but none of the polish. Where Travis had learned to perform charm, Wade had never bothered. His face was the unedited version of the same genetic material, heavier, more direct, with the flat affect of a man whose primary emotional register was irritation. He looked at Stone with the expression of someone who had been told to expect something but hadn't been told to expect this. "Who the hell are you?" Wade said. "Get out of the truck," Stone said. Get out of the truck." Wade looked at the flashlight. He looked past it at Stone's face, at the patch on his chest, at the eyes that were giving him exactly one option. He looked at the passenger seat, empty, which meant he'd come alone, which meant Travis had sent him ahead as an advance position, not as backup. Scout, not muscle. Stone filed that away. Wade opened the door and stepped out. He was bigger standing up, taller than Stone by 3 inches, heavier by 40 pounds, with the build of a man who moved heavy things for a living. He stood in the frozen mud of the county road and looked at Stone with the particular belligerence of someone who knows he's in the wrong but hasn't figured out how to walk it back yet. "You're on private land," Wade said. "So are you." "I have business here." "No, you don't," Stone said. "Your business is on Route 9, heading north, and he sent you ahead to sit on this road and make sure nobody left." He paused. "Am I wrong?" Wade didn't answer. "I'm going to ask you something," Stone said, "and I need you to think before you answer, because what happens in the next 5 minutes depends entirely on whether you answer honestly." Wade's jaw tightened. "How long have you known?" Stone said. "Known what?" "What your cousin does to his wife and daughter." The question landed in the space between them and the temperature dropped. Not the air, the conversation. Wade's face went through a rapid series of adjustments. Denial, anger, the specific flinch of a man hearing something named that he'd chosen to call something else for years. "Travis and Grace have—" "I didn't ask you about Travis and Grace," Stone said. "I asked you how long you've known. How many Thanksgivings did you sit across from that little girl and see the bruises and call them something else? How many phone calls did you get from your cousin at 2 in the morning asking you to come pick him up because things got out of hand? How many times did Mason call you before he called the station?" Wade's face was rigid. "You don't know anything about—" "I know the girl's nose is broken," Stone said. "I know her ribs have been cracked for at least a week based on how she's breathing. I know her mother has bruises on both arms in 4 different stages of healing." He stepped closer. "And I know you drove out here tonight without headlights on a road you'd have no reason to be on, unless someone told you exactly where we were going. He paused. So I'm asking you again. How long? Wade looked at the ground. The wind cut across the field. Somewhere south, on Route 9, headlights were getting closer. He's my family, Wade said. She's his family, Stone said. That didn't protect her. You don't understand how she... I understand exactly how it works, Stone said, and something in his voice shifted. Not louder, not harder, but deeper, coming from a place that had nothing to do with this field, or this night, or this particular man standing in the mud. I understand that men like you watch it happen and call it complicated. I understand that you answer the phone at 2 in the morning and drive over and help clean up and tell yourself it's none of your business. I understand that you've been part of the machinery that keeps that woman trapped, and you've been telling yourself a story about family loyalty that lets you sleep. He stepped closer again. I'm giving you one chance to stop being part of the machinery. Wade looked at him. His face was working, the muscles around his jaw tightening and releasing in the rhythm of a man fighting with himself, which is the hardest fight there is because you already know both sides. What do you want me to do? Wade said. Go home, Stone said. Drive back to Cedar Ridge. Don't answer your phone when Travis calls. Don't come back here. Don't be part of this anymore. He'll know I said... Yes, Stone said. He will. Wade stood in the frozen mud for a long moment. Then something changed in his face. Not courage, not quite. Something simpler and uglier. The look of a man who has been carrying a weight he chose to carry and has suddenly realized that carrying it costs more than putting it down. He got back in his truck. He started the engine. He pulled off the county road and turned south and drove away. Stone stood in the field and watched the taillights recede and felt nothing that resembled relief, because Wade Purcell leaving didn't solve the problem. Wade Purcell was the perimeter. The problem was still on Route 9, still heading north, and now the problem knew that the perimeter had been breached and would adjust accordingly. His phone buzzed. Deke. One word. Close. Stone turned and started walking back toward the farmhouse. He was halfway across the field when he heard the engine. Not a motorcycle. Not Wade's truck. A different sound, say, heavier, faster, the specific growl of a full-size pickup accelerating on frozen asphalt, coming from the south, coming up Route 9, coming fast. Stone broke into a run. He crossed the field in the dark, his boots cracking through the frozen surface of the mud, the flashlight beam bouncing ahead of him, the farmhouse growing larger with each stride. He could see Rowdy on the porch, standing, arms uncrossed now, his body angled toward the road. He's here, Stone said, breathing hard. I hear him, Rowdy said. Travis Harper's truck came around the last curve on Route 9 at a speed that was not the speed of a man who was uncertain. The headlights swept across the front of Darlene's property, and the truck slowed, not stopping, not parking, just decelerating to the speed of a man who was looking, and then it pulled onto the gravel shoulder across from the driveway and stopped. The engine kept running. The headlights stayed on, pointed at the house. Inside the cab, behind the wheel, Travis Harper sat motionless. He was looking at the two motorcycles in the driveway. He was looking at Rowdy on the porch. He was looking at Stone, standing in the frozen field between the house and the road, breathing hard, flashlight in hand. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then the driver's door opened. Travis stepped out. He looked different than he had in the diner. The clean-cut, controlled performance was still there in the architecture of his face, but something underneath it had shifted, the way a building looks different when you can see the cracks in the foundation. His jaw was set in a way that wasn't calm anymore. It was locked. The tendons in his neck were visible even from 30 feet. He left the door open and the engine running. "Where are they?" he said. Not a question. A demand. The first time Stone had heard him use the voice that Grace and Emma heard behind closed doors. Flat, stripped of performance, the raw instrument of a man who is accustomed to compliance and has encountered its absence. Stone didn't move. "Where's my wife?" Travis said. "Where's my daughter?" "They're not coming out," Stone said. Travis looked at him, looked at the patch, looked at the flashlight, looked at Rowdy, who hadn't moved from the porch, who was standing with his arms at his sides and his weight settled and his face empty of anything except attention. You have no legal right to it. I'm not interested in legal, Stone said. I'm interested in the bruise on your daughter's face and the fracture underneath it. Something shifted in Travis's expression, the crack in the foundation widening. She fell off her... Don't, Stone said. The word came out with a weight that stopped the sentence in Travis's mouth like a door closing. Do not say that to me. Do not say it to Rowdy. Do not say it to anyone else tonight. That lie is done. Travis stood in the road for a long moment. The headlights from his truck threw his shadow long across the gravel, a stretched, distorted version of himself projected onto the ground between him and the house. He looked at that shadow. He looked at the house. Grace, he called toward the darkened windows. Grace, let's go home. Nothing. I'm not angry, he called, the performance coming back now, sliding over the raw underneath like a mask being repositioned. I just want to talk, you and me. We can figure this out. Silence from the house. Baby girl, he called. Emma, come on out. It's cold. I'll make hot chocolate when we get home. Stone felt something move through him that he hadn't felt in a long time. A specific fury that lived in the bottom of his chest, the place where the things he didn't let out stayed until they couldn't stay anymore. He felt it rise and he felt himself push it back down, because right now, in this moment, fury was a liability, and steadiness was the only thing standing between Travis Harper and that front door. She can hear me, Travis said to Stone. She knows my voice. She does, Stone said. That's part of the problem. Travis's face went rigid. Inside the house, through the wall of the hallway, Grace Harper stood with her back pressed against the plaster and her daughter's hand gripped in hers, and listened to her husband's voice coming through the dark. And every cell in her body was running the same calculation it had run for 2 years. The calculation that always ended with go back. It'll be worse if you don't go back. It'll be worse for Emma. Just go back. But this time the calculation had a new variable. This time there were 2 men standing between her and the voice. This time there were photographs on Darlene's camera. This time Emma was gripping her hand so hard it hurt. Mom, Emma whispered. Grace looked down at her daughter. Emma's face was visible in the dim hallway light. The bruise, the cold compress now held loosely in her free hand, those eyes that had seen everything and processed everything and were looking at her mother now with something that Grace had never seen in them before. Not fear, resolve. Don't go back, Emma said. 3 words, whispered, the weight of 2 years inside them. Grace looked at her daughter. She looked at the dark window where her husband's voice was still calling her name, still offering warmth, still performing the role of concerned husband in front of the farmhouse and the night and the bikers and anyone else who might be watching. She looked at Emma's hand in hers, and the calculation, the one she'd been running for 2 years, the one that always ended the same way, changed. No, Grace said. We're not going back. Outside, Travis had stopped calling. The silence was worse than the voice. Stone knew it. Rowdy knew it. The silence of a man who has stopped performing is the silence of a man who has started calculating, and Travis Harper's calculations were the kind that happened in the spaces between witness and consequence. Travis looked at Stone. You don't know who you're dealing with, he said quietly. I know exactly who I'm dealing with, Stone said. No, Travis said. You don't. He reached into his truck. Rowdy moved on the porch, a single step forward, his hands dropping to his sides. But Travis didn't pull out what they expected. He pulled out a phone. He held it up so Stone could see the screen. Carl Mason is my wife's second cousin, Travis said. The county judge who dismissed the first report is her uncle. The woman who runs the only domestic shelter in this county went to high school with my mother. He paused. There is no system in Cedar Ridge that isn't mine. Stone looked at the phone. He looked at Travis. He understood in that moment the full architecture of the cage that Grace Harper had been living in. Not just the violence, not just the fear, but the infrastructure. The network of names and relationships and favors and silence that made the cage invisible from the outside and inescapable from the inside. Travis hadn't just beaten his wife. He'd built a world around her where every exit led back to him. Every door, every phone call, every uniform, every desk, all of it, his. And for a moment, just a moment, Stone felt the weight of that architecture pressing down on him the way it had pressed down on Grace, and he understood why she hadn't left. He understood why she'd called twice and stopped calling. He understood why she'd sat in that diner tonight running the same math over and over and coming up with the same answer. There was no way out that didn't go through Travis. "So here's what happens," Travis said, and his voice was calm now, the real calm, the calm of a man who has just laid down his best cards. "You get on your motorcycles, you ride out of here, and I take my family home. And tomorrow, everything is the way it was. And you were never here. None of this happened." Stone stood in the frozen field. He looked at the house. He thought about the woman he hadn't saved in time years ago. A woman whose name he still couldn't say without his chest going tight. A woman who had called him on a Tuesday night, and he hadn't answered because he'd been on the road and the signal was bad, and by Thursday it was too late and the signal didn't matter anymore. He thought about Grace standing inside that hallway. He thought about Emma's drawing of a horse running. He thought about what Travis had just told him. That the system was his, that the cage was total, that there was no authority in this county that wasn't already compromised. And he realized that Travis was right. There was no system that could help Grace Harper. Not here, not in Cedar Ridge, not in this county where every exit door had Travis Harper's name on the other side, which meant the exit wasn't going to be through a system. It was going to be through him. Stone took out his phone. He dialed Deke. "Where are you?" he said. "Silos, quarter mile." "Call Lena Walsh at Cedar Falls Women's Legal Center. Tell her we're bringing 2, tonight." A pause. "Cedar Falls is 40 miles. I know. In this storm. I know. Stone, that's out of county. That's out of Mason's jurisdiction. That's the point," Stone said. He ended the call and looked at Travis Harper standing in the road with his phone in his hand and his system behind him and his certainty written on his face. "She's not coming back," Stone said. Travis stared at him. "Not tonight," Stone said. "Not tomorrow. Not ever. You built a cage inside this county, and you're right. It's yours. Every piece of it. Every name, every desk." He paused. "So we're leaving the county." Travis's face changed. It was the first time Stone had seen genuine uncertainty on it. The first crack that went all the way through, not just the surface fracture of a man losing an argument, but the deep structural failure of a man realizing that the architecture he'd spent years building had a flaw he hadn't accounted for. The flaw was simple. The cage only worked if Grace stayed inside it. And 3 men on motorcycles, with 40 miles of frozen highway ahead of them and a women's legal center waiting at the other end, were about to carry her out of it. Travis looked at Stone. He looked at the house. He looked at the road. And for the first time in his life, Travis Harper understood what it felt like to be standing on the wrong side of a door that was closing. "You can't," he started. "Watch me," Stone said. He turned his back on Travis Harper. He walked to the farmhouse door. He knocked twice. And behind him, standing alone in the frozen road with his truck running and his shadow stretched long and his system crumbling around him like a building that has finally been asked to hold more weight than its foundation can carry, Travis Harper made the decision that men like him always make when they realize control is slipping. He decided to take it back, by any means necessary. And Stone, walking toward the farmhouse door with his back turned, didn't see Travis reach into the truck one more time, but Rowdy did. Rowdy moved before the thought finished forming. He came off the porch like something released from a spring. Not fast in the way young men are fast, not explosive, but with the terrifying efficiency of a man whose body had been trained to close distance before his mind finished calculating the cost. He covered the ground between the porch and Travis Harper's truck in the time it took Stone to turn around and see what was happening, and by the time Stone's brain processed the image, Travis leaning into the cab, his right arm reaching behind the seat, the shape of something long being pulled from the darkness behind the headrest. Rowdy was already there. He hit the truck door with his shoulder. The door slammed shut on Travis's arm. Travis screamed. It was the first honest sound Stone had heard come out of Travis Harper's mouth all night. Not performed, not calibrated, not aimed at an audience. A raw, involuntary scream that came from the place where pain lives before the brain has time to edit it. His arm was pinned in the door at the elbow, bent at an angle that was wrong, and whatever he'd been reaching for was still inside the cab, still behind the seat, still in the dark where Rowdy couldn't see it but could feel its presence, the way you feel the weight of a thing that changes everything. "Don't," Rowdy said. One word. He had his full weight against the door, his boots dug into the frozen gravel, his hands flat on the metal. He wasn't squeezing harder. He was holding. The difference between punishment and prevention, and Rowdy knew which side of that line he was standing on. Travis's face was white. His left hand gripped the edge of the door frame, his fingers pressing into the metal hard enough to drain the blood from his knuckles. His right arm was trapped, the forearm visible on the outside, the elbow and everything above it caught in the gap. "Let go of my arm," Travis said through his teeth. "Take your hand off whatever's behind that seat," Rowdy said. Stone was crossing the gravel now, his boots crunching on frozen ground, his breath coming in visible clouds. He reached the truck and looked through the window at the passenger side, trying to see what Travis had been reaching for. He saw it. A tire iron. 20 inches of solid steel, wedged behind the driver's seat in the gap between the seatback and the rear wall of the cab. Not a weapon by design. A weapon by intention. The kind of thing a man carries when he wants to be able to say, "It's just a tire iron," to anyone who asks, while knowing exactly what he planned to do with it. Stone looked at it for a long moment. He looked at Travis. "Open the door," he said to Rowdy. Rowdy looked at him. "Open it," Stone said. Rowdy stepped back. The door swung open. Travis stumbled sideways, grabbing his arm, his right elbow already swelling under his jacket sleeve. He leaned against the truck and cradled it against his chest, and looked at Stone with an expression that had moved past performance and past calculation, and into something more primitive. The face of an animal that has been cornered and knows it, and is trying to decide between retreat and attack. Stone reached into the cab and pulled out the tire iron. He held it in his right hand, down at his side. The weight of it was familiar, not because he'd held this particular one before, but because weight is weight and steel is steel, and every man who has ever held something heavy in his hand at night knows what it means. He looked at it. He looked at Travis. "This is what you were going to bring to the door," Stone said. It wasn't a question. Travis didn't answer. His eyes were on the tire iron. "Your daughter is inside that house," Stone said. His voice had changed. Not louder, lower. The frequency that comes from the bottom of the chest, from the place where the things that don't come out usually stay. "Your 9-year-old daughter with a broken nose that you gave her is sitting in that woman's bathroom holding an ice pack to her face, and you drove here with this behind your seat." "I wasn't going to—" "Don't tell me what you weren't going to do," Stone said. "Tell me what you were going to do. Say it out loud, in the cold, where it sounds like what it is." Travis said nothing. Stone walked to the edge of the driveway where the gravel met the drainage ditch that ran along Route 9. He threw the tire iron into the ditch. It hit the frozen mud and ice at the bottom, and the sound it made was flat and final. The sound of something heavy landing somewhere it couldn't be retrieved from easily. He turned back. "Get in your truck," he said. "That's my family and—" "Get in your truck," Stone said again. "Drive south. Go home. In the morning, a legal advocate from Cedar Falls Women's Center is going to file a protective order with the county court. Not this county. The next one. And every photograph that Darlene Marsh just took, of your daughter's nose, of your wife's arms, of the bruise pattern on her collarbone, is going to be attached to that filing." He paused. "Your system doesn't reach that far." Travis's face was doing something Stone had never seen on it. A rapid, visible collapse of the architecture he'd built to present himself to the world. The charm falling away. The performance falling away. The careful calibration of warmth and authority that had allowed him to operate for years inside the blind spot of other people's willingness to believe. All of it stripping away like paint and heat, revealing the raw material underneath. And the raw material was afraid. Not of Stone, not of Rowdy, not of the bikers or the motorcycles or the cold. Afraid of losing. Afraid of the specific terror that men like Travis carry at their core. Beneath every act of control. Beneath every closed fist. Beneath every door they lock and every phone they monitor and every dollar they manage and every friend they cultivate among deputies and judges and neighbors. The terror that if they stop controlling, they disappear. That without the architecture of dominance, there is nothing underneath. No self, no center, just the empty space where a person should be. Travis looked at the house. "Grace," he called. His voice cracked. not the performance of emotion, the actual thing. Grace, I'm sorry. I know things have been. He stopped, swallowed. Come home. We'll get help. I'll do whatever you. She can't hear you, Stone said. She can hear me, Travis said. She always hears me. She can't hear you, Stone said again, because she's done listening. The sentence landed in the dark between them, and Travis Harper's face went through one last transformation, from fear to something older and colder, the recognition that comes when a man who has built his entire identity around control realizes that the thing he controlled has moved beyond his reach. His mouth opened, closed. He looked at Stone with empty eyes. This isn't over, he said. Yeah, Stone said. It is. Travis got in his truck. He sat behind the wheel for a long time, 30 seconds, 40, nearly a minute, staring through the windshield at the house with the expression of a man looking at something that used to belong to him. Then he put the truck in gear and pulled off the shoulder and drove south on Route 9. Slowly, his taillights growing smaller in the dark until they were just 2 red points, and then nothing. Stone watched until there was nothing to watch. Then he sat down on the porch steps. The cold came through his jeans immediately. He didn't care. He put his elbows on his knees and his hands together and looked at the dark and breathed and let the adrenaline work its way out of his system the way it always did. In waves, each one smaller than the last, each one leaving behind a residue of exhaustion that settled into his bones like sediment. Rowdy sat down beside him. Neither of them spoke for a while. Tire iron, Rowdy said finally. Yeah. He was going to use it. I know. Rowdy was quiet again. He pulled a pack of cigarettes from inside his jacket, creased, half empty, the brand nobody makes anymore, and lit one with a lighter that took 3 tries in the wind. The smoke disappeared almost immediately, torn apart by the cold. You threw it in the ditch, Rowdy said. I threw it in the ditch. Some people would have kept it. Stone knew what he meant. Some people would have held on to it, as evidence, as leverage, as the kind of thing you show a judge when you want to establish intent. Some people would have photographed it. Some people would have used it. I didn't need it, Stone said. Rowdy smoked and said nothing. Inside the house, a light came on in the hallway. Stone could see it through the window, a thin, warm line across the floor, the kind of light that doesn't illuminate much but proves that someone is home. His phone buzzed. Deke. Harper passed me heading south, driving slow. He's done for tonight. Stone typed back. Stay on him until he's back in Cedar Ridge, then come here. He put the phone away and looked at the dark. Rowdy. Yeah. I need to tell you something. Rowdy waited. He smoked his cigarette with the patience of a man who had learned that the important things come out on their own schedule and pushing doesn't help. The woman I told you about, Stone said. Years ago. Rowdy didn't move. He knew which woman. They'd been riding together long enough for that. Her name was Claire, Stone said. Claire Benton. She called me on a Tuesday night, November 4 years ago. I was on 94 outside of Billings, and the signal cut out, and I didn't call back until Thursday. He paused. By Thursday, she was in the hospital. By Friday, she wasn't. The words came out flat, stripped of everything except fact. The way words come out when you've been carrying them long enough that the emotion has been compressed into something smaller and harder and more permanent than emotion. Not grief anymore, not guilt, just the dense, irreducible core of a thing that happened because you weren't where you needed to be. You've never told me your name before, Rowdy said. No. Why now? Stone looked at the house, at the light in the hallway, at the window where, somewhere inside, a 9-year-old girl was holding an ice pack to her broken nose, and a woman was standing in a hallway deciding for the first time in 2 years that she wasn't going back. Because I need you to understand why I can't leave until this is finished, Stone said. Not when Travis drives away. Not when the morning comes. Not until they're in Cedar Falls, inside that center, with an advocate who has jurisdiction outside of Mason and his people. He looked at Rowdy. I need to see it through. Rowdy smoked his cigarette down to the filter. He dropped it on the frozen step and ground it out with his boot. You don't need to explain that to me, he said. I know. But I'm glad you did. They sat on the porch in the cold and the dark and the silence that comes after the worst part of a night has passed, but before you're sure it's actually over. Darlene opened the front door behind them. "They need to eat," she said. No preamble. The voice of a woman who had spent enough time in crisis to know that at a certain point, the crisis gives way to the body's requirements, and the body requires fuel regardless of what the mind is processing. "I've got soup, coffee for you two." Stone stood up. His knees complained. He was 46 years old and he'd been running on adrenaline for 3 hours, and the transition from adrenaline to its absence was never graceful. "How's the girl?" he said. Darlene looked at him for a moment. The look contained something, not pity, not admiration, something more practical than either. The look of a woman evaluating whether the person in front of her is going to be useful or an additional problem. "Her nose is fractured," Darlene said. "Hairline. It'll heal. Her ribs—" She paused. "She's got 2 bruised ribs on the left side. They're not cracked, but they've been hurting her for a while. She's been breathing shallow to compensate. She's been doing it so long she doesn't know she's doing it." Stone absorbed that. "She's 9, Darlene said, quietly, "and she has the pain management of a combat veteran." Stone looked at the floor of the porch. "The mother?" "Grace is—" Darlene stopped, chose her words. "Grace is functional. She's holding. But there's a lot under the surface that hasn't come out yet, and when it does, it's going to come out fast." She looked at Stone directly. "She needs more than soup and a safe house. She needs a legal advocate and a medical examination and a therapist who specializes in trauma, and she needs all of that before Travis Harper has time to contact every cousin and deputy and judge in this county." "Cedar Falls," Stone said. "Lena Walsh at the Women's Legal Center. Deke's making the call." Darlene nodded. "Cedar Falls is good. Lena is good. But that's 40 miles in a storm on motorcycles with a 9-year-old who has bruised ribs." "I know. Do you have another option?" Stone looked at Rowdy. Rowdy looked back. "Deke has a truck," Rowdy said. "GMC, the one he parks at the storage unit off the junction." "How far?" 20 minutes. "Call him," Stone said. "Tell him to bring the truck here." Rowdy pulled out his phone. Darlene looked at Stone for a moment longer. "Come inside," she said. "The girl's been asking about you." Something moved across Stone's face that he didn't catch quickly enough to stop. A flicker. Not softness, not the kind of visible emotion that men in his world wore comfortably, but something adjacent. The shift of a man who has been operating in tactical mode for 3 hours and suddenly finds himself in the presence of something that tactics can't address. He went inside. The farmhouse kitchen smelled like chicken soup and coffee, and the specific warmth of a home where the heat works and the windows are sealed and the door locks from the inside instead of the outside. Grace was sitting at the kitchen table with a mug in both hands, her sleeves still rolled up, the bruises visible in the kitchen light with a clarity that the diner in the dark and the adrenaline had obscured. She looked at Stone when he came in. "He's gone?" she said. "He's gone. He'll come back." "Not here," Stone said, "and not tonight." Grace looked at her coffee. "He always comes back." Stone pulled out a chair and sat down across from her. The kitchen light buzzed faintly, the sound of old wiring, the kind that never quite goes silent. "Not this time," he said. "We're taking you to Cedar Falls. There's a women's legal center there. Different county, different jurisdiction, different judge. Travis's system doesn't reach there." "You don't know that. I know that the advocate who runs it has been doing this for 20 years, and she's dealt with men who had more reach than Travis Harper, and she's still there, and they're not." Grace looked at him. The expression on her face was one Stone had seen before. On Claire's face, 4 years ago. On the phone call he'd answered too late. The expression of someone who wants to believe but has been punished for believing before and isn't sure the risk is worth taking again. "What if it doesn't work?" Grace said. "Then we keep going," Stone said. "Next county, next state, however far it takes." "You can't do that. You don't even know us." "I know enough." "You know nothing about me." "I know you called for help twice and nobody came," Stone said. "I know you packed your daughter into a diner in a snowstorm because staying home was worse than being homeless. I know you've been running the math on leaving for 2 years, and it never added up because every number in the equation was his. He paused. I'm changing the numbers. Grace's eyes were wet. She didn't wipe them. She sat at Darlene Marsh's kitchen table at midnight with bruises on her arms and tears. She wasn't hiding and looked at a biker she'd known for 3 hours and tried to find the thing she'd been looking for in every face she'd studied for 2 years. A reason to trust. Why? She said. Why are you doing this? Stone looked at the table. He thought about Claire, about the phone call he didn't answer, about the 2 days between Tuesday and Thursday that he'd spent on the highway while Claire spent them somewhere he couldn't reach, about the hospital, about the after. Because I was late once, he said, and I can't be late again. Grace looked at him for a long time, then she nodded. Not the nod of someone who has been convinced, the nod of someone who has decided to stop waiting for certainty and start moving without it. Okay, she said. Cedar Falls. Emma was in the hallway. She'd been standing there for how long? Stone didn't know. Long enough to hear some of it, maybe all of it, standing in the dim light with the cold compress held against her face and her coat still on and her eyes doing what they always did, which was watching and measuring and cataloging and filing everything away. Stone saw her and stopped. She was looking at him with an expression he couldn't categorize, not the watchful composure she'd been wearing all night. Something underneath it. Something that had cracked open in the last few minutes. Maybe while Darlene was photographing her bruises, maybe while she listened to her mother say we're not going back. Maybe just now, hearing Stone's voice through the wall, telling her mother that they'd keep going as far as they needed to. You're taking us somewhere else, Emma said. Yeah, Stone said. Place called Cedar Falls. There are people there who help. Like Carl Mason helps? The sentence hit Stone in the chest. 9 years old, the precision of a child who has already learned that the word help doesn't always mean what it's supposed to mean. Not like that, Stone said. Different people. How do you know? Stone knelt down. Not because she was small, because the conversation required it. Because certain things need to be said at the same level. I don't know for sure, he said. I can't promise you it's going to be perfect or easy or that everything gets fixed tomorrow. I can tell you that the people at this place have been doing this a long time and they're good at it and they don't work for your dad. Emma looked at him. My dad knows everyone, she said. He doesn't know these people. He'll find them. Maybe, Stone said. And if he does, we move again. As many times as it takes. Emma was quiet for a moment. She lowered the cold compress from her face. The bruise was exposed in full, purple and dark beneath the kitchen light, spreading across the bridge of her nose and under both eyes, the visible record of a thing that should never have happened to any face, let alone this one. Does your nose hurt? Stone asked. Yes, Emma said. I'm sorry. It's not your fault. I know, he said. I'm still sorry. Emma looked at him. And then something happened that Stone was not prepared for, that nothing in the last 3 hours had prepared him for, that all the tactical assessment and distance closing and confrontation and adrenaline of this night had not equipped him to handle. Emma started crying. Not the way children cry in public, not performance, not protest, not the loud dramatic production that children use when they want attention or comfort or resolution. This was different. This was the crying that happens when a child who has been holding everything together finally reaches the place where she doesn't have to hold it anymore. The deep, shaking, almost silent crying of a body, releasing something it has been carrying too long. She stood in the hallway of Darlene Marsh's farmhouse and cried the way foundations crack, slowly at first, then all at once, her small shoulders shaking, her hands dropping to her sides, the cold compress falling to the floor. Stone didn't move. He stayed kneeling. He didn't reach for her. He didn't say anything. He gave her the space to fall apart, because falling apart was what she needed to do, and the best thing he could give her right now was the room to do it without anyone trying to fix it or stop it or manage it. Grace appeared in the kitchen doorway. She saw her daughter crying in the hallway and her own face collapsed, not into pieces, into something rawer and older, The expression of a mother watching her child finally release the thing she'd been carrying and knowing that she was the reason the child had been carrying it. Grace went to Emma. She knelt on the floor beside her and pulled her in and held her. And Emma pressed her face against her mother's shoulder and cried. Really cried. The kind of crying that has no words and no end point, just the ongoing release of something that had been trapped for so long it had forgotten what release felt like. Stone stood up slowly. He walked outside. He sat on the porch. He listened. Through the door, through the walls, through the old plaster and the warm air, he could hear Emma crying, and the sound of it, the small, shattered, devastating sound of a 9-year-old child finally feeling safe enough to fall apart, was the worst and the best thing he had heard in 4 years. The worst because it meant she had been holding this. The best because it meant she had stopped. Deke arrived with the truck 22 minutes later. He pulled into the driveway and killed the engine and got out and looked at Stone sitting on the porch in the dark and cold and didn't ask questions. He leaned against the truck and crossed his arms and waited. "Travis?" Stone said. "Back in Cedar Ridge, pulled into his driveway 15 minutes ago. Lights went off. He's inside." "Alone?" "Alone." "Mason?" "No activity at Mason's place. He's either sleeping or pretending to." Stone nodded. He looked at the truck. GMC Sierra, dark blue, the kind of truck that doesn't attract attention and has a back seat big enough for a woman and a child to be warm and horizontal. "Lena?" he said. "Expecting us," Deke said. "She's at the center now. She called in a volunteer advocate and a nurse practitioner." He paused. "She asked how old the child was." 9. Deke didn't flinch. But something moved across his face that he let move because it was dark, and there was nobody watching except Stone. And Stone had seen it before and would see it again, and neither of them would mention it. "She said to come straight there," Deke said. "The back entrance. She'll have the lights on." Stone stood up. He went inside. Grace was sitting on the hallway floor with Emma asleep against her shoulder. The crying had ended sometime in the last 10 minutes, fading into the deep, exhausted sleep that comes after the body finally lets go of everything it's been holding. Emma's face was pressed against Grace's neck, her breathing slow and steady for the first time all night. Not the shallow, rib-protecting breathing that Darlene had described, but real breathing, the kind that comes from the bottom of the lungs, the kind that only happens when fear releases its grip on the diaphragm. Grace looked up at Stone. "She's asleep," Grace whispered. "I know," Stone said. "We need to go." "How far?" 40 miles. Deke's got a truck, heated. She can sleep the whole way." Grace looked at her daughter's face, at the bruise, at the closed eyes, at the piece that should not have been remarkable on a sleeping child's face but was. "I can't carry her," Grace said. "My arms." "I'll carry her," Stone said. Grace looked at him. She looked at his hands, the same hands she'd been watching all night, the hands that had held coffee mugs and flashlights and a tire iron he'd thrown into a ditch, the hands she'd studied for steadiness and found it. "Okay," she said. Stone knelt and lifted Emma from Grace's arms. She weighed nothing. That was the first thing he noticed. Not nothing literally. She was 9, she had bones and muscle, and the accumulated weight of a child who was growing despite everything. But nothing compared to what she'd been carrying. The weight of her body against his chest was so much less than the weight of what she'd been holding inside it. She stirred, her eyes opened halfway. "It's me," Stone said quietly. "We're going somewhere safe." Emma looked at him through half-closed eyes. The bruise on her nose, the exhaustion on her face, the particular expression of a child who has been carried before but not like this. "The motorcycle?" she murmured. "Truck this time," Stone said. "You can sleep." Emma's eyes closed again. Her hand, small and cold, found the edge of Stone's leather vest and held on. He carried her to the truck. Deke had the back door open and the heat running. Stone laid Emma across the back seat and Grace climbed in beside her and arranged herself so Emma's head was in her lap and Emma's legs were covered by the jacket Darlene had brought from the house. Grace looked at her daughter and stroked her hair, and for the first time all night, her hands were not shaking. Darlene stood in the doorway of her farmhouse with a manila envelope in her hand. "Photographs," she said, handing it to Stone. 37 images, dated and time-stamped. I'll keep the originals on the camera. She paused. Tell Lena I'll testify if she needs me. Stone took the envelope. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me, Darlene said. Get them there. Stone got in the passenger seat. Deke got behind the wheel. Rowdy mounted his bike. He'd ride escort, following the truck at a quarter-mile distance, watching for headlights from behind. The truck pulled out of the driveway. The farmhouse lights receded in the mirrors. The dark opened ahead of them, Route 9 to the county line, then the two-lane highway that cut west through frozen farmland toward Cedar Falls, 40 miles of empty road in a storm that was finally beginning to break. The clouds thinning at the edges, the snow tapering, the first suggestion of stars appearing in gaps between the gray. In the back seat, Emma slept. Grace stroked her hair and watched the dark pass outside the window and said nothing. Stone sat in the passenger seat with the manila envelope on his lap and the weight of 37 photographs inside it and looked at the road ahead. Deke drove. Nobody spoke. The truck moved through the dark at 60 miles an hour, westbound, away from Cedar Ridge, away from Travis Harper's system, away from the county where every door led back to the same man. Behind them, Rowdy's single headlight followed like a heartbeat. And then, 23 miles from Cedar Falls, Deke's phone rang. He glanced at the screen. His face changed. Stone, he said. What? Deke turned the phone so Stone could see the caller ID. It was Lena Walsh, the Cedar Falls advocate, the woman who was supposed to be waiting at the center with the lights on and the back door open. Stone answered. Lena. Her voice was tight, controlled. The voice of a woman who has spent 20 years in crisis work and has learned to keep the panic out of her communication even when the panic is fully justified. Don't come to the center, she said. Stone's blood went cold. Why? There's a man here, Lena said. He arrived 10 minutes ago. He's sitting in a truck across the street from our back entrance. Cedar Ridge plates. He hasn't moved. He's just sitting there. Stone looked at Deke. Deke looked back. How did he know that? Stone said. I don't know, Lena said, but he's here. And Stone, he's not alone this time. There's a second vehicle, a patrol car. Stone closed his eyes. Mason. Carl Mason, who had made the call he'd been asked to make, and then made the call he'd been told not to make, and was now sitting outside the only safe door within 40 miles with a badge and the jurisdiction to use it. Travis's system. Travis's cage. Extending past the county line, past the boundaries Stone had calculated, past every assumption he'd made about how far this man's reach extended. He opened his eyes. How far are we? He said to Deke. 17 miles. 17 miles from a door that was no longer open. In the back seat, Emma stirred in her sleep. Her hand tightened on Grace's jacket. A small sound escaped her. Not a word, not a cry, just the unconscious vocalization of a child whose body remembers danger even when sleep has temporarily released her from it. Grace looked at Stone through the gap between the front seats. She didn't need to hear the conversation. She could read it on his face. He found us, she said. Stone looked at her. He looked at Emma. He looked at the dark highway stretching ahead of them toward a destination that no longer existed. And for the first time all night, for the first time since he'd sat at that counter in Benny's diner and seen a Band-Aid on a 9-year-old's face, Stone did not have a plan. The road was open. The storm was breaking. His brothers were with him, and the evidence was in the envelope, and the child was sleeping, and the mother was awake, and the 40 miles that were supposed to end this had just collapsed into nothing. He looked at Deke. Deke looked back at him with the expression of a man who has followed Stone through a lot of nights and a lot of situations and has never once seen him without an answer. Stone didn't have an answer. Not yet. But somewhere in the dark, between the county line and the closed door, between the 17 miles of frozen highway and the 2 vehicles waiting at the other end, between everything he'd promised Grace and everything he'd failed to give Claire, somewhere in all of that, the answer was forming. He picked up the phone. Lena, he said, call your board chair. Call the state hotline. Call every number you have that isn't connected to this county or the next one. Stone, what are you? We need a door that Travis Harper has never heard of, he said. We need it in the next 17 miles, and we need someone on the other side of it who doesn't owe anyone in Cedar Ridge a single thing. Silence on the line. Then Lena Walsh, who had been doing this work for 20 years and had built and rebuilt safe corridors in the dark more times than she could count, said two words that changed the night. I know someone. Lena's someone was a woman named Ruth Alderman. She ran a legal aid office out of a converted grain warehouse in a town called Millhaven, population 2,000, 31 miles northwest of Cedar Falls, in a county that shared no judicial overlap with Cedar Ridge and no administrative connection to anything Travis Harper had ever touched. Ruth had been a prosecutor for 15 years before she burned out on the politics of conviction rates and started a nonprofit that did the work the system wouldn't. She had no ties to Carl Mason. She had no ties to any deputy in any county within 100 miles. She had a fax machine, a notary seal, and an emergency custody protocol that she'd built herself after the state's version failed 3 women in the same calendar year. Lena gave Stone the address. Stone gave it to Deke. Deke didn't ask questions. He pulled the truck off the highway at the next interchange and turned northwest, away from Cedar Falls, away from the 2 vehicles sitting outside the center, away from the door that Travis's system had closed before they could reach it. The truck's headlights cut through the last of the storm, the snow thinning now, the wind dropping, the sky cracking open in dark seams between the clouds, where the cold light of stars appeared like something that had been waiting behind the weather all along. In the back seat, Emma slept. Her breathing had deepened into the slow, regular rhythm of a child whose body had finally surrendered to exhaustion. Her hand was still holding the edge of Grace's jacket, but loosely now, the grip of sleep rather than the grip of survival. Grace sat with her daughter's head in her lap and watched the dark pass outside the window and said nothing for 11 miles. Then she said, "How did he know about Cedar Falls?" Stone turned in the passenger seat. "Mason," he said. "Mason's jurisdiction ends at the county line. His jurisdiction does. His phone doesn't." Grace absorbed that. She looked down at Emma's face, the bruise visible even in the dim interior light, the swelling around her nose and under her eyes, the evidence of everything that had brought them to this truck, on this highway, on this night. "He called ahead," Grace said. "Travis called Mason, and Mason called someone in Cedar Falls. That's what it looks like. So wherever we go within his network," Stone said. "That's the point. Millhaven isn't in his network. The woman there, Ruth, she doesn't answer to anyone Travis has ever met." Grace was quiet. "How do you know that?" she said. "Because Lena knows her. 20 years. They built the corridor together." "The corridor?" "The path," Stone said. "For women who need to move. Between counties, between systems, between the places where one man's reach ends and another begins." He paused. "It's not official. It's not funded. It's just people who decided to be doors." Grace looked at him in the dark. "People who decided to be doors," she repeated, and her voice carried something that Stone couldn't identify at first. Not skepticism, not hope, but the specific sound of someone encountering an idea that redraws the shape of the world they thought they lived in. The idea that somewhere, in the dark, between the failing systems and the compromised authorities, there were people who had simply decided to open. She looked at Emma. "Okay," she said. "Millhaven." Mahan. They arrived at 4:17 in the morning. Millhaven was the kind of town that doesn't announce itself. No welcome sign, no city limit marker, just a gradual thickening of structures along the highway until the highway became a main street with a hardware store and a diner and a grain elevator and the particular quietness of a place that had been living at its own pace for 100 years without asking anyone's permission. The grain warehouse sat at the east end of town, set back from the road behind a parking lot that was empty except for a single car. An old Subaru wagon with a bumper sticker that read, "Notary Public," in faded letters. A light was on inside. The back door was open. Deke pulled the truck into the lot and killed the engine. For a moment, nobody moved. The silence after the engine cut was enormous. No wind, no highway noise, no storm. Just the tick of the cooling engine and the sound of Emma breathing in the back seat and the vast, frozen stillness of a small town at 4 in the morning. Stone got out. The cold hit him, but differently than it had all night. Not the aggressive, weaponized cold of the storm, the still, clean cold of aftermath. The temperature of a world that is finished doing its worst and is now just being what it is. His breath hung in the air and didn't move. The stars were fully visible now, spread across the sky in the dense, uncountable sprawl that only shows itself in places where the light pollution has given up. He walked to the back door. Ruth Alderman was standing inside. She was 57, with short gray hair and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and the particular build of a woman who has spent decades carrying files and cases and other people's emergencies. She looked at Stone with the evaluating gaze of a professional who needs to assess a situation in the first 3 seconds. "Lena called," she said. "I know. How old is the child?" 9. "Injuries?" "Fractured nose, bruised ribs. Mother has extensive bruising on both arms, neck, and collarbone." He held up the manila envelope. 37 photographs, dated and time-stamped, taken by a retired ER nurse named Darlene Marsh, who's willing to testify. Ruth took the envelope. She opened it. She looked at the first 3 photographs with the expression of someone who has seen 10,000 photographs like these and has never once allowed the repetition to become numbness. She closed the envelope. "Bring them in," she said. Stone went back to the truck. He opened the back door. Grace was sitting with Emma still asleep in her lap, looking at him with the expression of someone standing at the edge of something. Not a cliff, not a precipice, but a threshold. The edge between the life she'd been surviving and the life she might be entering. "This is the place?" she said. "This is the place." Grace looked at the building, at the light inside, at the open door and the woman standing in it. "She's real," Grace said. Not a question. A statement she was making to herself, confirming something. "She's real," Stone said. Grace woke Emma gently. Emma surfaced from sleep the way children do when exhaustion has been deep enough. Slowly, reluctantly, her eyes opening and closing and opening again. Her hands tightening on Grace's jacket before they remembered where she was and loosened. "Where are we?" Emma murmured. "Somewhere new," Grace said. Emma sat up. She looked at the building. She looked at Stone. She looked at the dark sky full of stars. "Is it morning?" she said. "Almost," Grace said. Emma climbed out of the truck. She stood on the frozen asphalt and looked at the world the way you look at a place you've never been before, with the raw attention of someone for whom novelty is still possible, despite everything. She looked at Stone. "Thank you for carrying me," she said. The sentence was so simple and so devastating that Stone had to look away for a moment. He looked at the stars. He looked at the dark. He looked at anywhere except the face of this 9-year-old girl standing in a parking lot at 4 in the morning, saying thank you for the most basic act of care, being held while she slept, as if it were remarkable. "You're welcome," he said. Grace took Emma's hand. They walked to the door. Ruth met them on the threshold and looked at Grace and looked at Emma and held the door open and said, "My name is Ruth. You're safe here. Come in." They went in. The door closed behind them. Stone stood in the parking lot and looked at the closed door and felt something he hadn't felt in 4 years. Not relief, not triumph, nothing so clean or complete as either of those. Just the quiet, exhausted knowledge that this time, tonight, the door had opened. And they had made it through. Rowdy pulled into the lot 6 minutes later. He killed his engine and dismounted and walked to where Stone was standing and looked at the closed door and looked at Stone and didn't say anything for a while. Deke was leaning against the truck, his arms crossed, his breath visible in the cold. The 3 of them stood in the parking lot of a grain warehouse in a town none of them had heard of 12 hours ago, in the dark and the cold and the aftermath, and they were quiet together the way men are quiet when the work is done and the adrenaline has left, and the body is settling into the bone-deep fatigue that comes after sustained effort. Rowdy lit a cigarette. "Mason's going to have problems," he said. "Mason's going to have a lot of problems," Stone said. "Ruth files in this county, different judge, different DA. The photographs go on record here, and once they're on record, they can't be buried the way Mason buried the reports. And Travis? Protective order, Stone said. Filed first thing in the morning, enforceable across county lines. If he comes within 500 feet, it's a felony. Paper doesn't stop men like Travis, Rowdy said. No, Stone said, but paper plus photographs plus a nurse willing to testify, plus a legal advocate who doesn't owe Travis anything. That changes the math. He paused. Grace has been running the math for 2 years, and it's never added up. It adds up now. Deke looked at the building. What about after? After is their life, Stone said, not ours. Deke nodded slowly. He understood. They all understood. There was a line between intervention and ownership, between helping and controlling, and the irony of protecting someone from a man who controlled everything was that the protection had to end at the point where the person being protected got to start making their own choices again. She's strong, Deke said. She's been strong the entire time, Stone said. That's not something we gave her. She had it before we got here, she just didn't have anywhere to use it. Rowdy smoked his cigarette and said nothing. He had the particular silence of a man who was thinking about something he wasn't going to say, and Stone knew him well enough not to push. The girl, Rowdy said finally. Yeah. She drew a horse. She did. Rowdy exhaled smoke. The horse was running. Stone looked at him. Kids draw what they need, Rowdy said. My daughter used to draw houses, every day, different houses, because we moved every 6 months when she was small and she never had one that lasted. He paused. Emma drew a horse running, not a house, not a door, not a cage. He dropped the cigarette and ground it out. She was already running before we showed up. She just needed someone to run alongside. Stone stood in the cold and let that settle. He didn't know Rowdy had a daughter. In 6 years of riding together, through everything they'd ridden through, Rowdy had never mentioned a daughter. The information arrived in the parking lot of a grain warehouse at 4 a.m, the way all the most important information arrives, without announcement, without context, just the sudden presence of a thing that had been there all along, waiting for the moment when it needed to be known. Stone didn't ask more. He didn't need to. Dawn came slowly to Millhaven, not the dramatic sunrise of movies, no orange horizon, no shafts of light breaking through clouds. Just the gradual, almost reluctant lightening of the eastern sky, from black to deep blue to gray, the way dawn comes in January in the places where winter doesn't let go easily. The stars faded. The buildings of Main Street took shape in the dim light. Somewhere, a truck engine started and idled. A dog barked once and stopped. Stone was sitting on the tailgate of Deke's truck when the grain warehouse door opened and Ruth came out. She was carrying 2 paper cups of coffee. She handed one to Stone and kept the other and stood beside the truck and drank from it without speaking. How are they? Stone said. Grace is with the advocate, Ruth said. They've been talking for an hour. The full statement, everything. 2 years of it. She paused. It's a lot. I know. She's doing it, though, all of it, not holding back. Stone drank his coffee. It was bad coffee, the kind that comes from a machine that hasn't been cleaned in a while, burnt and slightly metallic. It was the best coffee he'd ever tasted. Emma? He said. Ruth was quiet for a moment, the pause of someone choosing how much to share and how to share it. Emma is drawing, Ruth said. I gave her paper and a box of colored pencils from the supply closet, and she's been drawing since she sat down. She looked at Stone. She asked about you. What did she ask? She asked if you were still outside. Stone set down his coffee. What did you tell her? I told her you were still outside. Stone nodded. He looked at the dawn, at the gray sky, at the town waking up around them in the small, ordinary ways that towns wake up. A light turning on in the hardware store, a car pulling out of a driveway, the diner on Main Street glowing from inside as someone started the morning shift. He thought about Claire. He thought about the phone call he'd missed 4 years ago, the Tuesday night, the bad signal on I-94 outside of Billings. The 2 days between Tuesday and Thursday that he'd spent riding west while she'd spent them in the place where he couldn't reach. And the Thursday when he'd arrived at the hospital and stood in the corridor outside her room, and a nurse had looked at him with the face that nurses use when the information they're carrying is too heavy for words. He'd carried that weight for 4 years. He was going to carry it for the rest of his life. But standing in the parking lot of a grain warehouse in Mill Haven at dawn, drinking bad coffee, knowing that on the other side of a closed door a woman was finally telling her full story and a girl was drawing with colored pencils, he understood something about the weight that he hadn't understood before. It didn't get lighter, but it changed shape. It became the thing that had driven him off his stool in Benny's diner and into the booth where Grace sat with her shaking hands and her untouched coffee. It became the thing that made him throw the tire iron into the ditch instead of keeping it. It became the thing that made him kneel on Darlene's hallway floor and stay there while Emma fell apart. The weight of Claire didn't go away. It became the reason he kept answering. He finished his coffee and crushed the cup and put it in his pocket because Rowdy had a thing about littering and some habits you just respect. At 7:15, Grace came out of the building. She looked different. Not transformed. Transformation is a lie that stories tell, but altered in the specific ways that matter. Her shoulders were lower, not slouched, just released, carrying their own weight instead of the weight of anticipation. Her hands were visible, not hidden inside sleeves, and the bruises on her arms were exposed to the morning air without apology or concealment. She had been documented. She had been believed. She had said the words out loud to a person whose job it was to listen and who had listened without flinching and without doubt. She walked to where Stone was standing by the truck. "It's filed," she said. "Protective order. Temporary, pending hearing. Ruth's filing the permanent one Monday." She paused. She also contacted the State Child Protective Services office. "A caseworker is coming this afternoon." "Good," Stone said. "She says the photographs are strong. She says Darlene's testimony is strong. She says—" Grace stopped, took a breath. "She says it's enough." "It is enough," Stone said. Grace looked at him. The morning light was on her face now. Gray and cold and honest. The light that doesn't flatter. The light that shows everything exactly as it is. In that light, the bruises on her neck and collarbone were fully visible, and the exhaustion was fully visible. And the fear that hadn't fully left yet was fully visible. But so was the other thing, the thing that wasn't fear. "I don't know how to do this," Grace said. "The next part. The part where I don't know how to live without checking every doorway." "You don't have to know yet," Stone said. "You just have to get through today. Tomorrow, you get through tomorrow." "That sounds like something someone told you." "Someone did." Grace almost smiled. Not quite. The muscles around her mouth moved in the direction of a smile, and then stopped, as if the mechanism was rusty and needed time to remember how it worked. But the motion was there, the intention was there, and that was enough. "Emma wants to see you," Grace said. Stone looked at the building. "She's inside," Grace said. "She told me to come get you. Those were her exact words. Go get him." Stone walked to the door. He went inside. The grain warehouse had been converted with the particular economy of organizations that run on grants and donations. Mismatched furniture, fluorescent lights, a bookshelf full of legal guides, a coffee maker that was older than most of the furniture. The walls were painted a blue that was trying to be calming and mostly succeeding. There were no bars on the windows. There were curtains. Emma was sitting at a folding table near the window. She had colored pencils spread around her, 12 of them, fanned out on the table in a semicircle, each one sharpened to a fine point by someone who understood that the tools you give a child matter. She was drawing on a piece of white paper, her tongue pressed between her teeth, her hand moving with the focused precision that Stone had seen in the diner a lifetime ago. She looked up when he came in. "Hi," she said. "Hi," Stone said. "I drew something for you." She held up the paper. It was a horse. Not the dark geometric horse from the diner placemat. This one was different. This one was drawn in color, brown body, black mane, green grass underneath, blue sky above. The horse was running, full stride, neck extended, the way horses run when they're running because they want to, not because they have to. And beside the horse, drawn smaller but with the same careful attention, was a motorcycle. Stone looked at it. He looked at it for a long time. "That's you," Emma said, pointing at the motorcycle. "And that's me." She pointed at the horse. "You're the horse," Stone said. "I'm the horse." "Running." "Running," Emma confirmed, "but not running away from something. just running, because horses run. That's what they do. Stone took the drawing. He held it carefully, the way you hold things that weigh nothing and mean everything. "Can I keep this?" he said. "That's why I made it," Emma said. Stone folded the drawing carefully along lines that wouldn't crease the horse or the motorcycle and put it inside his leather vest, in the interior pocket, the one that sat against his chest. Emma watched him do it. "Your nose," he said. "How does it feel?" "Better," she said. Ruth's nurse looked at it. She said it's healing straight. "Good." She said I was brave. She's right. Emma looked at him with those eyes. The ones that had been measuring adults all night, the ones that had watched him across a diner and a farmhouse and a parking lot and a truck, the ones that had seen more in 9 years than most people see in 40. "Are you leaving?" she said. "Soon," Stone said. "You don't need me anymore." "I know," Emma said. "But I wanted to say goodbye." Stone knelt down, eye level, the way he'd done in Darlene's hallway, the way certain conversations require. "You're going to be okay," he said. "I know," Emma said. And the way she said it, not the practiced I know of the diner, not the survival I know that deflected further questions, but a real I know, grounded and steady and true, told Stone that she did know, that she had arrived through the wreckage of this night at a place where knowing was possible again. "My mom says we are okay now," Emma said. "She said it when we were talking to Ruth. She said it when the nurse finished. She said it when she looked out the window and saw you were still here." Emma paused. "That is 3 okays. We haven't had that many in a long time." Stone looked at this girl. He didn't say anything for a moment. He didn't trust himself to. 3 is a good number," he said. "It is," Emma said. She reached out and touched the pocket of his vest where the drawing was. A small gesture. A 9-year-old's hand pressing flat against the leather over a folded piece of paper. "Don't lose it," she said. "I won't," he said. He stood up. He walked to the door. He stopped and looked back. Emma had already picked up her colored pencils. She was starting a new drawing. Her tongue was between her teeth. Her shoulders were down. She was breathing, really breathing, from the bottom of her lungs, the way Darlene had said she wasn't doing before. She was breathing now. Stone walked out. The 3 of them left Millhaven at 8 o'clock in the morning. Deke drove the truck. Rowdy rode his bike. Stone rode his own, the Harley that had carried Emma through the dark 6 hours ago, the seat still creased where her small body had sat, the handlebars still holding the cold she'd gripped with her fingers. They rode east, not back to Cedar Ridge, back to the junction, back to the highway that led to their own territory, back to the roads they'd been riding before a snowstorm and a diner and a Band-Aid on a girl's face had rerouted everything. The morning was clear. The storm had broken completely in the night, and what remained was the aftermath. Clean air, sharp light, the world washed and frozen and still. The highway stretched ahead in a long, straight line, the asphalt dark with meltwater, the shoulders piled with fresh snow that sparkled in the early sun like something that didn't know what had happened on this road in the dark. Stone rode. The engine underneath him was the sound he knew best, the deep mechanical heartbeat of a Harley at highway speed, the vibration moving through the handlebars and the seat and his boots on the pegs and up through his spine into the base of his skull. He'd been hearing this sound for 20 years. It was the closest thing he had to silence, the closest thing he had to peace. He thought about Grace sitting in Ruth's office, telling her story for the 3rd time that night, to Stone, to Darlene, and now to Ruth, each telling a little easier, a little more complete, the truth becoming more solid with each repetition, the way muscle becomes stronger with use. He thought about Darlene Marsh, who had opened her door at 11 o'clock on a Thursday night without asking a single question, who had pulled out a camera and photographed evidence with the calm proficiency of a woman who understood that documentation was the difference between a woman's word and a woman's proof. He thought about Dot, who had told Grace about Travis's earlier visit and had left the back door unlocked, and had watched them walk through her kitchen and had chosen to see nothing. He thought about Rowdy's daughter, the one who drew houses. He thought about Claire. He let himself think about her. Not the hospital, not the corridor, not the nurse's face. The other Claire, the one who laughed with her whole body and called him at midnight to tell him about a bird she'd seen, and who had survived the first time and the second time, and had only stopped surviving the third time because the third time nobody answered the phone. He carried her with him. He always would. But today, in the clean cold light of a January morning, with a drawing folded against his chest, and the sound of Rowdy's bike rumbling behind him, and the long, straight highway unrolling ahead like something that had been waiting. Today the weight of Claire sat beside the weight of Emma, and the two of them together made something that wasn't lighter but was different, something that had a direction, something that moved forward. 3 weeks later, a letter arrived at the Ironbound Brotherhood's clubhouse. It was a plain white envelope, no return address, hand-delivered to the mailbox by someone who had driven a long way to put it there. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded once, covered in the careful handwriting of a 9-year-old who pressed hard with her pencil and chose her words the way she chose her drawing strokes, deliberately, with attention, with the awareness that what you put on paper stays. Dear Stone, my nose healed straight. The doctor in Mill Haven said it would, and it did. My mom says we are in a new place now. I'm not going to say where because Ruth said I shouldn't, but it has a school, and the school has an art class, and I entered a horse drawing in the art show. My mom is different. She doesn't check the doors as much. She sleeps later in the morning. She made pancakes on Saturday, and she didn't burn them, and we ate them at the table, and nobody was watching us. I still draw horses. I drew one for you on the other side of this paper. My mom says we are okay now. That is 3 okays. We haven't had that many in a long time. Thank you for the motorcycle ride. Emma Stone read the letter in the parking lot of the clubhouse, standing beside his bike, in the wind. He read it twice. He folded it and put it inside his vest, in the same pocket where the drawing lived, the one that sat against his chest. He stood there for a while. Rowdy came out of the clubhouse and walked toward his bike, and saw Stone standing in the lot and didn't ask. He mounted up and started his engine and waited. Deke came out a minute later. Same thing. No questions. Engine on. Ready. Stone got on his bike. He started the engine. The sound filled the parking lot. That deep mechanical heartbeat, the one he knew better than his own. And he sat with it for a moment, letting it settle, letting it become the silence it always became. Then he pulled out of the lot. Rowdy followed. Deke followed. 3 bikes on an open highway heading west, engines rumbling in the cold, clean air of a January morning that had nothing wrong with it. The road stretched ahead. The sky was clear. The wind carried the sound of the engines across the flat land and into the distance, where it mixed with the silence and became part of the landscape, the way all sounds eventually become part of the landscape if they travel far enough. Behind them, Cedar Ridge disappeared. Not literally. The town was still there. The diner was still there. The neon sign still buzzed OPE against the dark on Thursday nights. But in the specific geography of this story, in the map that these particular people carried inside them, Cedar Ridge was behind them now. A place they'd passed through, a place where something had happened, a place where a Band-Aid on a girl's face had changed the direction of a night, and the night had changed the direction of everything else. And somewhere far ahead, in a town with a school that had an art class, in a kitchen where pancakes were made on Saturdays, in a bedroom where a woman was learning to sleep past dawn because nobody was coming through the door, Grace and Emma Harper were no longer surviving. They were just living. The ordinary, unremarkable, infinitely precious act of living. And it was enough. It was 3 okays, and they hadn't had that many in a long time. So that's the end. Not because the story is finished. Stories like this one don't finish. They just reach the place where the people inside them finally get to stop running. Grace and Emma are out there somewhere. Stone is on the highway. And the door that Darlene and Ruth and Lena built in the dark is still open, waiting for the next knock. If you made it this far, and I know you did, because you're still here, do me one thing. Hit that like button. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you know a Grace, if you know an Emma, if you've ever been one, you're not alone. You were never alone. Sometimes the door is just harder to find. I'll see you in the next one.